On the evening of May 6, 2013, Tim Bosma put his 2-year-old daughter to bed and impatiently paced around the room of his house in Ancaster, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He was waiting for some guys who had promised to come and see his pickup truck, a Dodge Ram. The potential buyers had said they would arrive around 7 p.m., but it was already close to 9 p.m. Tim was confident they would come because one of the men had called him around 7:30 from Toronto. However, it was already dark, and it was getting late for a test drive. While waiting for the buyers, Tim felt uneasy for some reason and asked his wife, Charlene Bosma, whether he should go with the men if they arrived so late or just give them the keys and let them test the car themselves. Of course, she told him to accompany them if they wanted to see their car again. Charlene sincerely believed that, in the worst-case scenario, someone might steal their car, and they wouldn't be able to commute to work the next day. Finally, a little after 9 p.m., 2 men appeared at their doorstep. It was not surprising that they were late since they had arrived on foot. This was generally unusual, but perhaps they were specifically buying a car, because they didn't have their own. However, what made the situation very strange was the fact that the family lived in a very remote area, approximately an hour's drive from Toronto. One of the men, the taller one, explained that they had been dropped off by an acquaintance. His friend barely said a word during the entire conversation, and his face was nearly impossible to see under his hood. Nevertheless, the young family was in great need of money, so Tim pushed aside his doubts, smiled at Charlene, and got into the car. Around 9:20 p.m., the three of them drove away from their home. As the car was leaving, their neighbor, attempting to ease the tension, jokingly said to Charlene, "What if we're seeing him for the last time?" He had no idea how prophetic his words would turn out to be. The story of Tim and Charlene's meeting resembled a romantic fairy tale. Two intelligent, attractive, and successful young individuals were ready for marriage and, upon meeting each other, immediately understood that their union was meant to be. Over the course of 3 years, they tied the knot, moved into their own home, and welcomed a little daughter into their lives. However, after the arrival of their child, money became tight for the family, so Tim and Charlene decided to sell their beloved pickup truck and buy a simpler car. In May 2013, Charlene posted an online ad. And now, she nervously paced the room of her house. Tim had been gone for over an hour, and she was starting to panic. Even if the men had decided to take the car for a test drive, they had been gone for too long. Charlene called her husband multiple times, but all the calls went to voicemail. He hadn't responded to her messages. Although she knew for certain that Tim had charged his phone before leaving for work, when he still hadn't returned late into the night, Charlene called the police to report her husband's disappearance. The Hamilton police took the disappearance of the 32-year-old man very seriously. Canine search teams and search and rescue teams were deployed, not to mention the hundreds of Ancaster residents who joined in the search efforts. Despite the community's involvement in the search, many suspected that the man had simply run away, possibly due to a disillusioned life or accumulated debts. However, the detectives found no evidence to support these theories. The police organized a press conference where Charlene directly addressed the abductors, pleading for them to release Tim and emphasizing the need for their little daughter to have her father, and for her, a husband. Barely holding back tears, she added, "It was just a car, just a silly car." It was only when Charlene uttered those words that everyone realized, all at once, that the car was the very reason for the man's disappearance. And thus, anyone could become a victim simply because they decided to sell their pickup truck. 3 days later, Tim's phone was found. It was discovered by a worker in the grass near a construction site, approximately 20 minutes away from Hamilton. However, there was no sign of Tim or his pickup truck nearby. The discovery of the phone itself was not significant since the police had already obtained all the necessary information from the telecommunications company. Detectives started investigating the phone number from which potential buyers of the pickup truck had called Tim. It turned out that the phone was registered under a false name and address. But Tim was not the only one listed in the outgoing calls. The persistence of the criminal who had used the number multiple times led the police to Igor Tumenenko, an Israeli army veteran who was selling a similar Dodge Ram and had posted an advertisement online. Igor told investigators that he had taken a test drive with two men just 2 days before Tim's disappearance, but unlike Tim, Igor had returned home after the drive. Perhaps it was because Igor was a tall, robust former soldier who could resist attackers if necessary. But most importantly, Igor provided the investigators with a description of the men, mentioning that the tall guy had a small bag slung over his shoulder and a tattoo on his wrist that read ambition. During the subsequent press conference, the police shared the description of the two men with journalists, and within 2 days, colleagues from Toronto contacted them, claiming to know exactly who the Hamilton police were looking for. They identified the wanted man as a young millionaire, playboy, and one of Canada's most eligible bachelors, 27-year-old Dylan Millard. Long before the police took an interest in him, Dylan Millard was a young prodigy. At the age of 14, he made headlines as the youngest Canadian to pilot a helicopter and an airplane on the same day. Born in 1985 to Wayne and Madeline Millard, Dylan was the heir to the multi-million-dollar airline company, Millard Air, founded by his grandfather. However, by the time he turned 20, the guy dropped out of university and led a rather idle lifestyle. Dylan threw poolside parties, drove the most luxurious cars, and was always surrounded by glamorous women. He allowed his friends to live in his numerous houses and apartments, and he moved so frequently that some of the household staff never even met him. 2 months before the events described, his father unexpectedly passed away, leaving Dylan as the inheritor of the family fortune. According to his friends' estimates, it ranged from $10 to $20 million. It was hard to believe that a millionaire, with a garage full of luxurious cars, would be capable of kidnapping someone over a pickup truck. The police put Dylan under surveillance, and discovered that he was friends with an employee of the airline named Mark Smick. Unlike Dylan, Mark did not come from wealthy parents. In fact, he made a living by selling illicit substances. However, what was of greater importance to the police was the extensive list of criminal offenses associated with Mark. At the same time, by comparing the footage from several surveillance cameras, the investigators pieced together the events of that evening. Shortly after the pickup truck left Tim's house, a dark SUV can be seen closely following it in the video. Dylan was behind the wheel of one vehicle, while Mark was driving the other. It cannot be stated with certainty, but Tim was likely already dead. Half an hour later, the cars stopped, and the criminals changed the license plates of Tim's pickup truck to avoid police detection. Now that they had obtained the desired pickup, their next task was to get rid of its owner. At 2 a.m., they arrived at the Millard Air hangar. The pickup was towing a large trailer with some heavy equipment on it. Mark and Dylan entered the hangar, and soon sparks and flames started to emerge from the equipment on the trailer. This mysterious fire would burn throughout the night. Early in the morning, when Tim had been missing for 12 hours, Millard Air employees received a message from Dylan instructing them to stay away from the hangar. Arthur Jennings, an employee of Millard Air, recalls that the demand was explained to him as company policy. On Tuesday, he obediently avoided entering the hangar, but on Wednesday, he came across a pickup truck identical to the one described in the news. The man didn't know what to do. Deciding to photograph the vehicle and its identification number, he dialed the anonymous crime reporting hotline and requested it to be checked. They confirmed that it was the same vehicle. The man was so shocked that he felt physically ill. Fearing for himself and his family's lives, he only reported what he had learned on Friday. By that time, the pickup truck was no longer in the hangar. Fortunately, thanks to the phone data and Igor's testimony, the police already had a suspect. On May 11th, 4 days after Tim's disappearance, Dylan was arrested by the Hamilton police. Charlene was relieved, thinking that her husband would now be found quickly. She didn't know that the police no longer expected to find him alive. Acting on a tip from neighbors, officers arrived at Dellen's mother's house, where they discovered the pickup truck in a large trailer on the driveway. The pickup had been partially dismantled and meticulously cleaned, but despite that, they found Dellen's fingerprints and traces of blood inside. The keys to the pickup are still hanging on Dellen's keychain. But what about the equipment that the pickup was towing that night? The police searched all of Dellen's apartments and homes. On his farm, they found an industrial incinerator for burning various types of waste. This huge furnace was the very equipment from which sparks of flame were seen on the night of Tim's disappearance. Inside the furnace, forensic experts found small bone fragments, including human teeth. Due to the intensity of the fire, obtaining DNA was impossible. However, it is presumed that the bones belonged to Tim, and on May 14th, the police officially announced his death. Astounded by their findings, the investigators wondered if there could be other victims among Dellen's acquaintances. They continued to search Dellen's farm, but by that time the Toronto police had already missed 3 crucial clues, each of which could have saved Tim. The first was the mysterious disappearance of 23-year-old aspiring actress Laura Babcock. By the time arrests were made in connection with Tim's murder, Laura was already missing for about a year. She had met Dellen at a pub in Toronto. They dated for no more than a month, after which they remained friends, although romantic encounters still occurred. In 2010, Laura met Sean Lerner. Sean was a complete opposite of Dellen, and he was clearly in love with Laura. Although their relationship ended after 18 months, they remained friends. After graduating from college, Laura had difficulty getting her life together. She was depressed, had arguments with her parents over their house rules, and found herself practically homeless, staying with friends. To make ends meet, Laura turned to the escort industry. Upon learning about her friend's difficulties, Sean paid for a motel room where Laura could stay with her pet and provided her with an iPad to search for more conventional work. It was Sean Lerner who organized a party for Laura's 22nd birthday, inviting Dellen and his future girlfriend, Christina Nuga, among others. Clearly, it was this love triangle that led to the tragedy. Laura continued seeing Dellen behind Christina's back, but Christina likely suspected something, and on Laura's 23rd birthday, she sent her a message saying, "Happy birthday. It has been exactly a year since Dellen and I became intimate." Laura immediately retaliated, saying, "Great, and I was with him 2 weeks ago." This message genuinely upset Christina about her boyfriend's infidelity. Dellen had to assure her that he would deal with Laura, promising Christina, "First, I'll hurt her. Then I'll make her leave. I'll remove her from our lives." On July 3, 2012, Laura went home to her parents and left her dog, suitcase with belongings, and a shoebox containing approximately $1,000 in cash. She then went to the subway station, where Dellen picked her up and drove her to his home. At 7:03, Laura made a call to check her voicemail, and her phone connected to a tower near Dellen's home. After that, her phone stopped working completely. At 7:30, Dellen informed Mark that he was on a mission and would return in an hour. The next day, Laura's iPad was connected to Dellen's computer, and its name was changed to Mark's iPad. Afterward, Dellen took a picture of an object wrapped in blue tarp. In light of the events that unfolded, the photo speaks for itself. Dellen asked a worker from his aviation company to build a massive furnace for him, but when that experiment failed, he ordered a waste incinerator. On July 23, he sent a message to Mark stating that the barbecue was hot and ready for meat. Dellen's internet search history during that time revealed his interest in the effective temperature for cremation. Finally, he took a photo of Mark with the pipe from the incinerator and filmed the flames erupting from it. On July 14, Laura's family and Sean Lerner reported her disappearance to the police, But upon learning about her recent mental state and profession, the officers didn't pursue her case, assuming she would return on her own. However, Sean refused to let the matter rest. He obtained a printout of Laura's recent calls and conducted his own investigation. It didn't take him long to discover that the last 8 calls from her phone were made to Dylan Millard. Sean called Dylan, who initially ignored the calls but eventually agreed to meet him and discuss the situation. Dylan claimed that Laura had asked him for illicit substances but didn't receive them. He then told Sean not to hope to see her again. Sean relayed all the information he had gathered to the police, presenting them with Dylan Millard's name on a silver platter. However, the detectives once again refused to take any action. Laura's case was forgotten, but a year later, when Sean heard about Dylan's arrest for murder, he quickly connected the dots and convinced Laura's family to call the Hamilton police. Unlike their counterparts in Toronto, the Hamilton officers showed great interest in their story. After the arrest of the men, Laura's iPad and her sports bag with her name and address written by her hand were found at Mark's house. In addition to incriminating photos on the iPad, investigators found a video in which Mark raps and essentially confesses to burning the girl's body and throwing her phone into the river.
Outside the home, and if you go swimming, you can find the phone.
Laura was still considered missing in November 2012 when the Toronto police missed 2 crucial leads. They were of a slightly different nature, but equally important to the case. An online advertisement for a motorcycle appeared, and just a few days later, its owner, Marty McDougall, came home to find that both the motorcycle and its trailer were gone. He knew that there was a surveillance camera right across the road that could help identify the thieves. Marty contacted the police, and an officer came and took the camera footage. However, despite Marty's persistent attempts to reach the investigator, he heard nothing from the police. It wasn't until several months later, after Tim's murder, that the Hamilton police contacted Marty, having discovered the stripped motorcycle and trailer. Where were they? In Millard's aviation hangar. This raises the question of why the police didn't use the footage to track Millard months earlier and save Tim. The third crucial lead that the police missed was the sudden demise of Wayne Millard, Dylan's father. After speaking with family members and colleagues, the police discovered that Wayne had threatened to cut off the funding for his son's extravagant lifestyle. Dylan was spending enormous sums of money and showed little interest in the family business. Wayne didn't want his son to destroy the fruits of his family's hard work and was planning to put an end to it, but he didn't get the chance. Wayne was found in his bedroom, deceased. He had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, and a revolver was found nearby. Initially, the case seemed obvious to the police. However, now that the detectives knew about Dylan, they wanted to re-examine the facts. At that time, he was not considered a suspect, although it's unclear why investigators didn't pay closer attention to his behavior. He appeared too calm, relaxed, and gave very strange answers to questions. However, when a relative passes away and someone needs to identify the body, if someone asked when was the last time they saw that person, nobody would answer, 5 minutes ago to the coroner. No, a person would recall the last time they saw their relative alive. The reason for this is that most people don't want to think about death. When answering such a question, the brain automatically goes back to a previous, more positive moment. But the problem with Dylan is that the murder brought him pleasure, so when asked about the last time he saw Wayne, he immediately thought about the body. One more important detail, Wayne was cremated, but his hands were tested for gunshot residue, and none was found. In combination with the odd behavior of the millionaire's son and the apparent financial benefit for the heir, it's strange that the police quickly closed the case. As for the family's friends and journalists, they were informed that the man died from a brain aneurysm. Since they didn't know the true cause of his death, no one suspected anything. Otherwise, they would likely have demanded a thorough investigation. When the detectives finally took up the case after Dylan and Mark's arrest, it wasn't difficult for them to discover that the revolver from which the bullet was fired had been purchased by Dellen prior to Laura Babcock's disappearance, and his DNA was found on it. Initially, Dellen claimed that he stayed at Mark's house before returning home around 6 p.m. and finding his father. However, phone records showed that he was at home from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m., precisely during Wayne's time of death. It's as if the accumulating evidence against the two was not enough. Dellen secretly passed 65 letters to Christine from prison, instructing her on what statements she should give. He ordered her to destroy all the letters immediately after reading them, but she did not comply. During the trial, Dellen and Mark almost confessed to the murder, shifting blame onto each other. However, in this case, it didn't matter who pulled the trigger. Both accomplices were found guilty of the murders of Tim and Laura and were sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Dellen received a similar punishment for his father's murder. The judge ruled that they would serve their sentences consecutively, meaning Dellen would have to spend 75 years in prison before he could even be eligible for parole. This is the maximum sentence ever imposed in the history of Ontario. Dellen's girlfriend, Christina Nuga, pleaded guilty to obstructing justice in relation to Tim's death. She revealed that she transported a car trailer and an incinerator to dispose of the evidence. The 24-year-old received a lenient punishment due to her testimony against Dellen and spent 3 months in prison. She later moved to Poland, where she attended medical school. The remains of Laura and Tim were never identified, but it is highly likely that they were found in the incinerator. Dellen Millard grew up in an affluent family and could have had everything he wanted. However, it turned out that what he wanted was to become a criminal. Just 2 years after meeting Mark, they started going on what they called night missions, stealing cars and motorcycles, not for profit, but for the thrill of it. They often burned them on the side of the road or destroyed them in an aircraft hangar. Once considered one of Canada's most eligible bachelors, he officially transformed into a serial killer, accused of murdering his father, former girlfriend, and an unknown person in less than a year. But if Laura and his father stood in Dellen's way, we will probably never know why he killed Tim. Whether out of boredom, audacity, or growing confidence that he could get away with anything, even murder.
At one time, James Beaudoin came into the world in March 1991 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He was the eldest son of a single mother, struggling to make ends meet. Seeking to escape the echoes of his past, he was reborn a second time in New York at the age of 22. Among the many promises New York holds, the primary one remains the chance to turn fiction into truth and become the person one dreams to be. Unexpectedly, even to himself, he found himself the son of a millionaire, delving into all the pleasures afforded by his new family and societal status. Luxurious apartments in Manhattan, poolside soirees in the respectable Hampton suburb, top-tier cars and suits from renowned designers. The young man gained much, but much was also expected of him in return. His dizzying ascent demanded safeguarding his reputation and steering clear of troubles. The evening of November 12, 2016, began like any other Saturday evening for 26-year-old Joey Comunale. Joey, from Stamford, Connecticut, was an attractive, friendly, athletic guy who worked for his father in the multi-million-dollar security business empire he had built. The young man enjoyed life to the fullest, including regular trips with friends to the finest establishments in New York. So that Saturday, he didn't miss the opportunity to unwind at one of Manhattan's most popular clubs, Gilded Lily. A little after 3 a.m., clubgoers spilled onto the street, chatting cheerfully as they awaited taxis. Joey's friends noticed several girls who couldn't take their eyes off him. Girls often paid attention to the handsome young man, and this evening was no exception. Being a very sociable guy, he struck up a conversation with them, and later 2 more strangers joined the group. At one point, one of Joey's friends borrowed his phone, turned away to make a call, and when he turned back, Joey was no longer there. He was already getting into a taxi with the girls and 2 other guys. His friends decided to return the phone to him later and went back to Connecticut. They were confident that Joey had been invited to continue the night elsewhere and that everything would be fine with him. As it turned out, Joey's new acquaintances were 28-year-old Lawrence DeLeon and 29-year-old Max Gemma, old friends and apartment neighbors in Jersey City. Both grew up in very affluent families, especially Max. His father was a former mayor of Oceanport, New Jersey, and had business dealings with Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law. Max himself sold computer software. Larry's family bred racehorses and was involved in real estate, a business Larry was drawn into as well. Joey's friends were not wrong. Lawrence DeLeon invited the whole group to his friend's apartment in Sutton Place, Manhattan. Sutton Place is like a tiny enclave accessible only to people with a lot of money, and if you were invited there, you'd definitely want to go. Naturally, Joey and the three girls agreed, but during the trip, one of them, suddenly realizing she was heading to a party with strangers, devised a safety measure for herself and her friends. She took a photo of Larry and sent it along with his name to her friends, just in case they needed to find her. Although the photo was a precautionary measure, it was taken more as a joke. None of the girls felt in any danger. Joey wasn't worried at all. He was a strong, athletic guy, and also very friendly, with no reason to think that anything would go wrong. The lively group arrived at the house a little after 4 a.m. A door was opened by an attractive young man in jeans and without a shirt. He introduced himself as James Rackover. Jimmy was friendly, amiable, and somewhat boastful, mentioning his father several times, a renowned jeweler named Jeffrey Rackover, whose clients included Oprah Winfrey, Jennifer Lopez, and Donald Trump. Jimmy lived in a more modest 4th floor apartment despite his father's residence being on the 32nd floor. The young people had a great time, enjoying themselves and taking videos of each other. A harbinger of something ominous was Larry's pocket knife, which he constantly fidgeted with, using it to open beer bottles. A sign of impending danger could have been Larry DeLeon swinging around a pocket knife. However, something terrible happened later that night because Joey did not leave there alive. Joey Comunale grew up in a very close-knit family, particularly bonded with his father, Pat Comunale. When his son didn't return home that night, Pat wasn't immediately concerned as Joey had gone to the club and was expected back later. However, Sunday arrived and Joey was still missing. He hadn't responded to his father's messages, which was unheard of. So, Pat called his son's friend, who explained that he accidentally kept Joey's phone. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but Joey's relatives and friends immediately took action. His friends scoured social media for any traces of him. Using Instagram's location feature, they searched for photos from the club posted on Saturday evening and early Sunday morning. They found a picture of someone familiar with a girl getting into a taxi with Joey. His friends asked for her phone number and called her. She recounted that they had a great time at the party in Sutton Place, and after that, Larry and Joey escorted her and other girls to an Uber. Joey waved goodbye, seemingly planning to return to the apartment with Larry. However, when they contacted Larry, he claimed he hadn't seen Joey after they left the girls at the taxi. He added one detail that immediately raised doubt in his words. The last time he saw Joey, supposedly, Joey said he was going to buy cigarettes. This was unusual for Joey because he sometimes smoked, but never bought cigarettes. Suspecting deception, early in the morning, Pat went to the New York Police Department. The New York police detective took the father's concern seriously and suggested they go together to Sutton Place and check the surveillance camera footage. They saw that at 6:44 a.m., Joey and Larry escorted the girls to the car and then went back into the building. Joey didn't exit the building after that. At this point, Pat felt uneasy and, citing the need to make a call, stepped outside. There, he noticed a building worker starting to collect garbage. Pat rushed back to the detective and asked to stop the trash collection. He was convinced that there might be some crucial evidence in it. And he was right. In the trash bags, the police found Joey's blood-stained pants, his shirt, and his ID, along with a necklace gifted by his father, which he never took off. At that moment, Pat had no doubt that his son didn't leave the building alive. On other surveillance camera recordings, detectives observed Jimmy wheeling out 2 suitcases from the building. And 14 hours after Joey returned to the building, Jimmy Rackover and Larry DeLeon departed in Jimmy's father's Mercedes, heading south towards New Jersey. However, the police couldn't determine where the car had stopped. Later, blood was discovered in Jimmy's apartment, in the car, and even on the luggage cart by forensic experts. Detectives suspected Jimmy borrowed his father's Mercedes to transport the body. However, there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. The police desperately needed one of the young individuals to start talking, and soon they got lucky. Assuring Larry that they didn't consider him a murderer, the investigators persuaded him to reveal who killed Joey. Larry fell for this trick. Here is what he told about that fatal evening. The evening was going beautifully. Everyone was having fun, and there was absolutely no aggression, especially towards Joey. When dawn arrived, the girls decided it was time for them to go home, and Joey and Larry escorted them to the car. Then the two of them returned. We probably will never know what exactly happened next. One thing that all stories agree on is that Max was sleeping on the couch at that time, and he had nothing to do with the crime. According to Larry's words, Joey made an offensive comment, essentially calling him a freeloader. Larry, known for his aggressive nature, couldn't tolerate this and attacked Joey. Joey had drunk too much and couldn't defend himself, but Larry continued to brutally beat him, even after he fell unconscious. However, despite starting the fight, Larry claimed that Joey's killer was Jimmy Rakover. Allegedly, when he saw how badly Joey was beaten, he declared that they needed to get rid of him permanently to protect themselves from potential trouble. They asked Max to leave so he wouldn't have to be involved in what would happen next. Larry and Jimmy moved the guy into the bathroom, placed him in the bathtub, where Jimmy stabbed him. Then Jimmy attempted to dismember the body with a bread knife, but it turned out to be not that easy. So they abandoned this plan and began cleaning the apartment with bleach and paper towels. Throughout the afternoon, they discussed how to dispose of the body and devised a plan, a crazy and evil plan. Waiting for darkness, Jimmy called the building staff, asking for a luggage cart. Larry wrapped the body in a blanket and threw it out of the window from the 4th floor. Jimmy borrowed his father's car, loaded suitcases onto the luggage cart, placed them in the trunk, then drove to the body. The accomplices put the body in a suitcase, loaded it into the trunk, and drove away. Larry recounted that they arrived in Oceanport, New Jersey, the town where he grew up. The guys put the body in a shallow pit behind the flower shop, where there were no surveillance cameras. Then they doused Joey with gasoline and set him on fire. After Larry confessed to where they left the body, the police found the remains. Joey was not previously acquainted with the guys, had no relation to any of them, and the accomplices hoped this would buy them enough time. If they could get rid of the body before it was searched for, they would escape the police. But with the dawn, calls and messages from Joey's friends and relatives, as well as the police, began appearing on their phones. The search began. The worst part is that when Pat Comunale called Larry and heard that his son had gone out for cigarettes, Joey was actually lying in the bathroom just a few steps away from him. Jimmy Rakover, upon hearing Larry's confession, vehemently denied his version of events. According to him, he had left the apartment for a few minutes, and when he returned, Joey was already dead, and he had to deal with the consequences of his friend's aggressive actions. Moreover, Larry's words were highly contradictory. First, Jimmy allegedly demanded that all the guys change into clean clothes. Larry stated that when he persuaded Max to go to the bedroom to change, he turned around and saw a knife sticking out of Joey's head. However, no knife wound was found on the victim's head during the autopsy. Then Larry said that Joey was dead when they dragged him into the bathroom, but later corrected his statement, claiming that Jimmy stabbed him and got angry when he couldn't dismember him. This again contradicts the findings of the pathologist, who stated that Joey was killed by 15 stab wounds in the chest. Jimmy, Larry, and Max were arrested. Despite Larry's testimony, all three refused to admit their guilt, even Larry himself, claiming that the police ignored his request to have a lawyer present. Larry and Max were released on bail, while Jimmy had to await the case's hearing in jail because he couldn't post bail. However, the investigators were in for the biggest surprise because it turned out that Jimmy Rakover, who led such a fabulous lifestyle, was not who he claimed to be. To everyone, Jimmy was the son of a millionaire living in a prestigious neighborhood. But in reality, he was a former fraudster from Florida named Jimmy Baudouin. Even as a teenager, Jimmy had a history of trespassing, robbery, and even once, while under house arrest, removed an ankle bracelet to enjoy a month of freedom. Despite the list of offenses, his close ones claim that Jimmy wasn't the person he was portrayed to be. He always helped others, and there's still a dog at his mother's house that he rescued. They argue that Jimmy had a stroke of bad luck because he grew up without a father and started associating with the wrong crowd. Jimmy agreed with this because after serving 2 years in prison for robbery, the young man decided it was time to put an end to that life and moved far away from old friends to New York. His path to success was no different from hundreds of other young people. He worked as a bartender, a DJ, a consultant at Ralph Lauren, and even tried to earn extra money as a model. 3 months after moving to New York, he met Jeffrey Rackover at a gym. The middle-aged single millionaire took him under his wing. He dreamt of someone caring for him at the end of his life, dreamt of a son. Since the guy was already an adult, Jeffrey couldn't adopt him but allowed Jimmy to take his family name. To ward off potential rumors and scrutiny, Jeffrey told his friends a sentimental story about a young man who showed up at his door one fine day, claiming they weren't acquainted, but that he was his son. Jeffrey helped his son get an education and a job as an insurance broker specializing in jewels and art objects. Eventually, Jeffrey helped Jimmy settle in Sutton Place. Thus, Jimmy Baudouin from Florida, a small-time fraudster who decided to drastically change his fate, became James Rackover, the son and heir to the multi-million-dollar estate of a famous jeweler. The trial of Jimmy began on October 15, 2018. The prosecutor attempted to prove that it was Jimmy who inflicted the fatal stab wounds on Joey. However, their case appeared very weak. The difficulty for the prosecution was understandable. The two main suspects were shifting blame onto each other, and there wasn't a clear answer as to who actually committed the murder. The crime occurred in Jimmy's apartment, but there was a lot more blood found on Larry's clothing. Additionally, it was Larry who was seen brandishing a knife at the party, not Jimmy. Finding a motive was even more challenging because nobody believed Larry's claims about Joey's rudeness. At one point, the prosecution stated there might not have been a motive at all, but later, realizing that a motive would sway the jurors in their favor, the prosecutor devised a scenario where the guys might have argued over illegal substances. The prosecution called in 3 girls who were hanging out with the guys that evening. However, their testimonies were more in favor of Jimmy because all of them unanimously stated that the guys behaved in a friendly and amiable manner, more like brothers than friends. They complimented each other's physical fitness and even engaged in a playful competition at one point, dancing to music from the movie Magic Mike. The girls joyfully recorded the party on video, and these recordings completely confirmed that there was no display of aggression, especially towards Joey. Overall, the trial seemed to rely more on critiquing Jimmy's lavish lifestyle than on determining what actually happened. After a week of deliberation, there was no direct indication that Jimmy was the killer. The prosecutors needed something or someone else. Suddenly, they had their key witness. Louis L.J. Ruggiero, a 24-year-old, took the witness stand. Louis was the son of the host of a news program and a close friend of Jimmy's father, Rosanna Scotto. Following in their famous parents' footsteps, Louis and Jimmy quickly became friends. Now, Louis claimed that Jimmy confessed the murder to him. He called Jimmy when the police were still reviewing surveillance footage. Jimmy needed to talk. According to Louis, Jimmy confessed to slashing Joey's throat and then stabbing him multiple times. Jimmy even asked Louis if he wanted to hear the most gruesome part of the story. After they and Larry disposed of the body, Jimmy returned home, ordered pancakes, and calmly ate, as if nothing had happened. Initially, Louis didn't believe Jimmy, but after noticing police near his apartment, he began to consider that maybe Jimmy was telling the truth. Louis's testimony strongly impressed the jurors, especially his vivid description of how Jimmy allegedly slashed Joey's throat. However, the problem arose when there were no knife wounds found on Joey's throat. Furthermore, before the trial, while speaking with prosecutors, Louis stated that Jimmy broke Joey's neck. Yet during the trial, he claimed there was a cut on Joey's throat. Then, suddenly during the trial, he mentioned the knife stabs. Intentionally or not, Louis's statements changed to fit the facts. Additionally, recently, Jimmy and Louis had a falling out. Louis even claimed that Jimmy extorted money from him. It becomes entirely unclear why Jimmy would confess to Louis about the murder, essentially placing his fate in the hands of someone who despised him. Not to mention, upon hearing this confession and knowing that an investigation was ongoing, Louis didn't even think to call the police. Instead, he called his mother and a lawyer. In turn, Jimmy's attorneys insisted that their client didn't commit the murder but helped conceal it. Jimmy never denied this. The overwhelming evidence left him no choice. Jimmy's lawyers pointed the jury to a large dent in a ring that Larry was wearing that night. There was no dent in the ring while they were at the club, and it likely resulted from Larry repeatedly hitting Joey in the face. Such powerful blows could have been fatal. The lawyers also highlighted Larry's pocket knife. Could it have been used to inflict wounds? It was due to Larry's aggressive nature that Jimmy, the apartment owner, had to deal with the consequences. These consequences poorly aligned with both Jimmy's and Larry's versions. A natural question arose. Why would someone go to such lengths to cover up someone else's crime? The defense's answer was that Jimmy feared losing his luxurious lifestyle. While prosecutors used his lifestyle to tarnish him in the eyes of the jury, the defense used it to explain his innocence. After all, if a dead body had been found in his apartment, it would have put an end to his warm relationship with Jeffrey Rackover. Finally, the defense had another ace up their sleeve. Surveillance cameras captured 4 crucial minutes when James exited the apartment, precisely when the altercation might have started. The video clearly showed him heading towards Jeffrey's safe for illegal substances, but not finding any. This was corroborated by the camera inside the jeweler's apartment. At that time, Jeffrey Rackover was peacefully sleeping in his bed, trusting his adoptive son completely. It seemed like the defense arguments were enough to sow seeds of doubt in the minds of the jurors. However, Lewis's testimony decided the outcome of the case, which otherwise relied solely on circumstantial evidence. Jimmy was found guilty on all counts of the charges. For second-degree murder, he was sentenced to a prison term ranging from 28 years to life. A month later, Larry Dillon unexpectedly pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in exchange for a 23-year prison sentence, although he filed an appeal after the verdict. Max was sentenced to 6 months in prison for obstructing justice. He served 4 months and was released in August 2019. Jimmy Baudouin got a second chance in life when he made the most correct decision of leaving his criminal past behind and moving to New York. He was fortunate again when he met Jeffrey Rackover, who called him his son and generously endowed him with his affection and belief in the young man's future. Today, Jimmy hopes that he hasn't exhausted his luck, his happy tickets. He filed an appeal and hopes for a successful review of the case. The appeal will take a lot of time, but Jimmy doesn't lose his optimism, although there is a high likelihood that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. However, who knows? Maybe luck will smile on him again. The Joey family remembers their son every day. Previously, they would talk on the phone with their father every day, but now he visits his son's grave daily. Pete can be considered the true hero of this story. If not for his resourcefulness and quick action, the case would never have been solved. If it had been some kid from California who called his parents once a week, the man reflects. A week goes by, surveillance camera footage is gone, the trash has been taken out, and that would have been the end of it for these guys. They would have gotten away with this crime.
It could have happened to anyone and at any time, but it happened to her. An innocent desire to withdraw some cash before meeting with friends turned into a nightmare for the schoolgirl. It took the kidnapper only 3 minutes and 45 seconds to attack the unsuspecting girl and take her away in an unknown direction. Where does such precision come from? The kidnapping was caught on video. In those years, it was rare for cameras to capture a crime, and detectives watched in horror as the image of the kidnapper appeared in the corner of the screen. They could hardly suppress the urge to shout to the girl through the screen, "Run, leave, he is already close," as if that could have saved her life. Friday, March 10th, 2000. For 18-year-old Sofia Martinez from El Paso, Texas, the end of the week meant a chance to relax and unwind with friends. She had worked hard throughout the year, but graduation was just around the corner, and she was confident she would successfully finish school. Preparations for this joyful event were already underway, including senior photos, which had been taken in advance. Sofia was such an excellent student that by her final year, she was allowed to attend school only for half the day. Because of this, she found a part-time job at a store in a shopping mall. Usually, part-time work gives teenagers the opportunity to earn extra money for their own expenses, buy clothes, and spend more on going out with friends. But by her 18th birthday, Sofia had managed to save enough to buy a brand new red Pontiac Grand Am. She loved her car, which served as a reminder of everything she had achieved on her own, a reflection of her hard work and independence. But even that wasn't enough for Sofia. She had already started saving money for college. Sofia planned to attend the University of El Paso and, after graduation, work in her hometown as a history teacher. Despite her young age, she worked hard, studied, participated in programs for future teachers, and was on the verge of an exciting future. No one doubted that she would succeed. Sofia dedicated her free time to her family. She especially loved playing with her younger brothers and her nephews, the children of her older sister. And since Sofia spent so much time working, studying, and being with her family, she never had a steady boyfriend. But she wasn't a shut-in either. She enjoyed spending time with friends and occasionally going on dates. So she easily agreed when a coworker offered to set her up on a blind date. Her coworker worked part-time as a hairdresser, and one of his clients, a very nice young man, seemed like someone Sophia might like. The three of them decided to meet at a popular club in El Paso on the night of Friday, March 10th, 2000. The club opened at 9 p.m., and they planned to meet at 11. Sophia's mother, Lourdes, and her younger sister, Marianne, helped her pick out a beautiful red dress in which she looked absolutely stunning. A little before 11, Sophia wished her younger brothers goodnight, kissed her mom and sister goodbye, got into her car, and drove off. Lourdes and Marianne watched from the window as the Pontiac disappeared from view. They weren't worried about Sophia because she was a very reliable, organized, and responsible person. Besides, they knew both her co-worker and the name of the guy she was supposed to meet. On the contrary, they were happy for her, excited that she was about to have a wonderful evening and meet someone new. But in the morning, when Marianne didn't find her sister in her room, she was surprised. The bed was neatly made, as if Sophia had never come home. Their mother didn't know where Sophia was either. The women truly became worried when Sophia's manager called and said she hadn't shown up for work. They started calling Sophia's friends, but no one knew where she was. Calls to the hospitals also led nowhere. That's when Lourdes contacted the police and reported her daughter missing. Unfortunately, different police departments do not always share all information about new cases. So when the police in El Paso received the report about Sofia Martinez's disappearance, they didn't know that their colleagues in New Mexico had already found a brand new red Pontiac in the desert on the Texas-New Mexico border. The car was parked about 100 meters from the road. It was in working condition, but the passenger side window was shattered, and inside the car, there was blood, a lot of blood. Next to the Pontiac were footprints from sneakers and tire tracks from another vehicle. The car was towed to New Mexico for examination. After checking the license plate, officers discovered the car was registered to Lourdes. Only after contacting her did they find out that their colleagues in El Paso were already investigating the disappearance of Lourdes' daughter, 18-year-old Sofia Martinez. Only then did the two police departments connect and share information. They were sure they needed to act quickly because Sofia was in danger. But the next morning, sad news arrived. Teenagers collecting tin cans in the desert noticed the body of a girl about 300 meters from the road. She was lying on her back. Her red dress was covered in blood, and her tights were torn. The teenagers didn't know it, but they had just found the body of Sofia Martinez. It was 16 kilometers from the place where her Pontiac had already been discovered. Detectives found neither identification nor the girl's purse. Her face was disfigured after several gunshots directly to the face. On the inner surfaces of her thighs, there were abrasions typical of sexual assault. Fortunately, the desert preserved valuable evidence: a shoe print from the perpetrator and a .22 caliber bullet. But what surprised the detectives most was a photograph of a child, which was somehow hidden in the left cup of Sofia's bra. This confused them because the missing girl didn't have any children. When Sofia's family was informed about the discovery of her body, they confirmed that she always carried a photo of one of her younger brothers with her. But that still didn't explain how the picture ended up in her bra rather than in her purse or pocket. However, at that moment, it was much more important to figure out what Sofia had been doing the evening of her disappearance. And unexpectedly, it was revealed that she had a blind date. Of course, the investigators invited the young man she was supposed to meet to the station. 21-year-old Ernie Hernandez admitted that he was late for the meeting because he was very nervous. But when he arrived, he was met only by their mutual friend at the club. They both waited for Sofia, but she never showed up, and Ernie decided that she had changed her mind about meeting him. He insisted that he didn't know what happened to the girl, and that he hadn't even had a chance to meet her. Ernie wanted to help with the investigation, so he allowed his house and car to be searched, provided his shoes for comparison, and gave a DNA sample. He even agreed to take a polygraph test. He was quickly cleared as a suspect. Unfortunately, despite this, people continued to whisper for a long time that he had killed the girl. Ernie lamented that he hadn't gone to pick up Sofia. If he had, she would still be alive. But how could he have known? He expressed his condolences to Sofia's mother, but Lourdes never blamed him for anything. She was sure that she and her daughter would have become friends if Sofia had made it to the club as planned. The autopsy was performed on March 13th, and it confirmed what the detectives already knew. Sofia had died after 5 gunshots to the face. Some of the bullets merely grazed her, while others were fatal. The victim had been assaulted, and the perpetrator's DNA was found on her body. The DNA was checked against the database, but the rapist was not found in it. But one clue did surface. On the floor of the Pontiac, there was a receipt from an ATM issued on March 10th, the day of the girl's disappearance. The receipt showed the time 10:23 p.m. This meant she had withdrawn money after leaving home and on her way to the club. This was a significant breakthrough in the case. After all, ATMs have cameras, so the officers would be able to review the video footage. There could also have been security cameras on the parking lot or in the nearby bank building. The officers went to the bank and first of all, examined the area. Right next to the ATM, they noticed shards of glass. Later, experts confirmed that the glass had fallen from the shattered window of Sophia's Pontiac. Although the detectives were already sure of this, their hopes were also confirmed. The ATM was monitored by 2 cameras. When the detectives explained to the bank staff what they needed, they didn't even have to get a warrant. The staff were eager to help. The footage was not very clear, but by combining video from the 2 cameras and the one on the ATM itself, the investigators were able to see Sophia's abduction. They watched the footage with bated breath. It's important to remember that this was the year 2000. The number of cameras on the streets wasn't as impressive as it is today. While now there is a camera in every smartphone, and it's nearly impossible to hide from a watchful digital eye back then, the footage of Sophia's abduction left an indelible impression on the detectives. As they watched the video, they wanted to shout, to warn the girl, as if they could have changed anything. Here's what they saw. The red Pontiac arrived and stopped at the ATM at 10:22 p.m. Sophia rolled down the car window and began entering her PIN. The ATM camera captured the transaction displayed on the screen, and the investigators saw that she withdrew $20. Apparently, she wanted to have some cash before going to the club. It took just 30 seconds to withdraw the money and get the receipt, but Sophia didn't leave immediately. For about another minute, the camera filmed her as she put the money away, buckled her seatbelt, checked herself in the mirror, and touched up her hair and makeup. She looked happy and content. There was no one behind her, no line, so she wasn't bothering anyone. The club was only 10 minutes away, and Sophia was definitely not late, so she had time to enjoy herself in the comfort of her car. But just 2 minutes after Sophia pulled up to the ATM, and before she could drive off, a man in black clothing and a beanie appeared in the corner of the screen. He was holding a gun pressed tightly to his body. The man moved quickly to the passenger side of the Pontiac, but the girl had no idea. There was no one who could help her. In a matter of moments, the man sneaked up to the unsuspecting girl's window, and just 7 seconds after his appearance on the video, he was pointing the gun at the window, inches from her face. It looked as if he shot without warning. The investigators saw a flash, and simultaneously, the passenger side window shattered. The bullet hit Sophia. This was the first shot fired by the criminal at her face, which didn't kill her, but injured her. Of course, it hurt terribly. She sat in shock, her head lowered, her hands pressed to her face when the man grabbed the door handle, but she didn't give in. He then darted to the door handle behind the girl. Unfortunately, the door opened, and the criminal climbed into Sophia's car. He shut the door and now sat behind Sophia. At 10:24 p.m., the girl withdrew money from the ATM again. During this time, she was holding a tissue to her face, trying to stop the bleeding. She now withdrew $200. At 10:25 p.m., Sophia drove away from the ATM. The criminal was still in her car and was clearly telling her what to do. It's unknown where they were headed, but it's known where Sophia and her car eventually ended up. After reviewing the footage, the detectives sat in complete silence. They had just witnessed the final moments of the 18-year-old girl's life, but to their horror, their only lead was the unclear image of the man in black. The police held a press conference explaining what had happened to Sophia and showing a photo of the kidnapper. Of course, the hotline was flooded with calls, but as usual, they were all unhelpful. However, one tip that came in less than 2 weeks after the murder seemed promising. In the desert near the spot where Sophia's body was found, a driver's license belonging to another woman was discovered. It turned out that she too had been the victim of an attack, but fortunately, she had survived. The robber had grabbed her purse at a shopping mall, and she had no idea how her documents ended up in the desert. The police theorized that the robber had simply thrown away the license after taking everything valuable from the purse. There were many similarities between the two cases. First of all, it was the same shopping mall where Sophia worked. Before the murder, Sophia had also been robbed. And finally, the document was found in the same place as Sophia's body. The media quickly jumped to conclusions and began to accuse the mall robber of the murder, creating such a stir that he turned himself into the police. His name was Josh Valenzuela, and he certainly did not want to be associated with the murder. He provided DNA, which did not match the rapist's DNA. Additionally, he did not resemble the criminal in the video. He was cleared from the list of suspects. Months went by. The bank near where Sophia was attacked installed additional surveillance cameras and improved the lighting around the ATM. Unfortunately, this was the only change in the case. However, people did not lose hope and continued to raise a reward for information about the killer. A local radio station, local businesses, and even Sophia's classmates all came together to fundraise. In the end, they managed to collect $51,000. 6 months passed, and everyone thought the case would remain unsolved. However, when the detectives least expected it, the police received a call from 20-year-old Heather Jacques. She confessed that she knew who attacked Sophia Martinez and that she had been haunted by nightmares for the past 6 months, but she couldn't come forward earlier. So what had changed now? Heather explained that one of the accomplices had been sent to prison for another crime, and that person was her still husband, Michael Angelo Jacques. Heather shared what she knew, or rather, what her husband had told her. In March 2000, Heather, who was expecting a child, was hospitalized with an infection. On the evening of March 10th, the same night of the attack on Sophia, Heather's husband, Michael Hackis, and his friend William Joseph Berkeley were with her in the hospital room. The men weren't shy about discussing their plans in front of Heather. From their conversation, she understood that they were going to get some money. Heather assumed they were talking about selling illegal substances, as this wasn't their first time doing something like that. They left later in the evening, but before they did, William or Will grabbed some gloves that were in a package in the room and a few packets of Vaseline. Heather was curious and asked, "Why do you need those?" "For that," Will snapped. Michael returned around 10 p.m., and Heather was sure of the time because she was watching the news. He immediately told her they had committed a robbery. Michael explained that he had dropped off Will at the ATM, where Will hid in the bushes. Meanwhile, Michael waited for him in the parking lot of a billiard club. Michael told his wife that he saw a red car pull up to the ATM. How he could have seen this from the parking lot of the billiard club, which was quite far from the ATM, was unclear. According to Michael, the driver of the car was entering the pin when Will approached the vehicle and shot through the window. He forced the driver out of the car and drove away, stealing the vehicle. Michael claimed he tried to follow the red car, but it was driving too fast. So he went back to the billiard club to have a couple of beers and wait for Will. However, Will never showed up, so Michael returned to the hospital to be with his wife. Since investigators had already viewed the video, they knew things didn't happen quite the way Michael described. It was unclear whether Will had misled Michael or if Michael was deliberately withholding details from his wife, especially since she was expecting their child. Will arrived at the hospital around midnight. The stolen car was still with him. Mike told Heather that they were going to drive the Pontiac out to the desert near the border and burn it. After that, he left. Heather fell asleep as she was still feeling sick. When she woke up in the morning, her husband was there. He told her that they had burned the car in the desert near the border, but that wasn't true. The car was found in a different location, not the one Mike mentioned, and it wasn't burned. On March 11th, Heather was discharged from the hospital. She decided to grill some steaks for her family and Will, who was living with her, her husband, and their 2 children. Heather was worried that her husband might get into legal trouble, and she started asking Will questions. She wondered what he would do if the woman whose car he had stolen had seen his face. Will turned around and smugly said, "I'm sure she saw my face." He then handed Heather Sophia Martinez's driver's license. Heather was shocked to see how young the woman was, just 2 years younger than her. She couldn't understand why he had taken her ID. Mike explained that this way, the victim would be too scared to report the crime, fearing that the criminals knew where she lived. Then right in front of her, Will threw Sophia's ID into the grill fire. The events that followed in their house frightened Heather even more. Will suddenly shaved off all his hair, including his facial hair. Heather also noticed a keychain for the Pontiac, which clearly had once belonged to Sophia, but now it had Mike's key on it. Heather realized that her husband was deeper into this situation than he let on. She was afraid that it could end badly and worried about their children, who might be left without a father, and possibly without a mother if she were considered an accomplice. On March 12th, Mike asked Will to leave their house because Heather didn't like his company. Heather indeed didn't like Will's presence, nor how the men acted as if nothing had happened. However, she was horrified when, on the news, she learned that Sophia Martinez had not just been robbed, but murdered after being sexually assaulted. Heather demanded an explanation from her husband, and she began to panic. But Mike told her to calm down and keep herself busy, like cleaning the grill to get rid of any evidence in case the police showed up. Heather, afraid of her husband, obeyed. She gathered all the ashes, put them in a bag, and threw them away, but she hid the partially intact ID of Sophia. Later, the couple went to court because Mike was accused of issuing a fake check. That was when Heather saw the $200 her husband had, the same amount Sophia had withdrawn from the ATM. Mike explained where he got the money. Heather didn't understand why Mike had the money if Will had stolen it. However, when the news showed the photo of the robber, Heather realized why Will had shaved. Despite the blurry image, she could have recognized him. Among Mike's belongings, she also found the shirt that Will had worn that day. Mike told her to throw it away. All this time, she hadn't dared to disobey him, but after Mike was arrested, she wasn't as afraid anymore. This was the first time that 23-year-old Mike Hackus had gotten into trouble with the law, but this time he ended up behind bars for domestic violence. Mike had beaten Heather, and she reported it to the police. She told him she was going to tell the detectives everything she knew about the Sophia case. Mike asked her not to rush and to wait for his release so they could go to the police station together, probably hoping for a reward. But Heather did it her own way. She told the detectives everything she knew, signed her statement, and gave them the almost untouched driver's license of Sophia Martinez. Mike, of course, couldn't have hoped for any reward, but he was given the opportunity to tell his version of the events. He immediately confessed to being an accomplice in the crime. He stated that he had participated in the robbery, but hadn't killed the girl. Mike explained that the idea of the robbery had originated because of him. He needed money for legal expenses related to the fake check, and without it, he risked going to prison. He complained to Will, and his friend promised to help. They discussed various options for getting money. Finally, Will suggested robbing someone at an ATM. Will got a black revolver and some black clothing. For a while, the men drove around the city, looking for an ATM that was in a quiet area with poor lighting. Once they found a suitable location, they parked the car so that Mike could see the ATM. Will got out, changed into black clothes, put on medical gloves, grabbed the gun, and hid in the bushes. Mike waited in the car and suddenly saw a shiny new red Pontiac. At first, he thought the driver must be wealthy, but then he realized it was a schoolgirl driving and started flashing his headlights. He wanted to signal Will to wait for the next car, but Will misunderstood his signal. Mike claimed he couldn't see what happened next, but when the Pontiac drove off, he realized that his friend was in that car. So he supposedly went back to his wife at the hospital. He told Heather that he had waited for Will at the pool hall. Will arrived at the hospital closer to 3 a.m., and Mike was surprised to see the broken window of the Pontiac. He asked what had happened. This was puzzling because Mike hadn't heard a shot, even though he was on an empty parking lot just a few meters away from the ATM. Will explained that he had tried to open the passenger door, but it was locked. He had intended to break the window with the revolver, but couldn't, so he shot instead. Only then did he realize that he had hit the victim in the face. He ordered the girl to open the door, and she obeyed. He got in. She tried to drive away, but he told her to take out the money, and only after that did he allow her to leave. The kidnapper then drove his victim into the desert. He told Mike that on the way there, Sophia had tried to negotiate with him, even offering him sex. Will had refused. Terrified, the girl asked him, "Am I going to die?" To which Will replied, "I don't know." In the desert, he forced her out of the car, and she asked him again if he was going to kill her. He said yes. Then Sophia asked the killer to give her a photograph from her purse. It was a picture of her little brother. She asked him to hold it for her in her final moments. Will brought her the picture, then aimed the gun at her forehead and shot. Sophia fell to her knees and he fired the remaining bullets into her. He confessed to his friend that he looked down at the dead girl and smiled. If Mike's words are to be believed, Will also chose not to share all the details with his friend. Mike helped Will drive the red Pontiac into the desert. Then Mike took Will home and went to the hospital to his wife. The man finished his confession by stating that he had thrown Sophia's car keys onto the roof of their house. The last time he had seen the revolver, it was on Will's father's nightstand. Officers did indeed find the keys on the roof. Now it was time to talk to Will. The suspect was only 21 years old. Previously, he had worked and lived with his girlfriend and their 4-year-old daughter. But suddenly, he abandoned his job, his girlfriend, and his daughter and moved in with Mike. However, after Mike kicked him out of the house, he returned to live with his parents. On October 1st, the police found the man hiding in his parents' bedroom. Interestingly, Will immediately confessed to the murder, taking full responsibility for it. He barely mentioned Mike. The man signed his confession. However, after speaking with his father, Will asked the detectives to meet with him again. It's likely that his father told him he was foolish to cover for his friend, as Mike had already confessed to the police. Will explained to the investigators that he and Mike had made a deal. Whoever the police caught first would take all the blame. "We were supposed to be brothers. he said bitterly. This time, he revealed more details about the kidnapping and murder, portraying Mike as the manipulator and mastermind of the crime. His version didn't differ too much from what the detectives had already heard from Mike, but Will tried to make himself seem more human in their eyes. For example, when he ordered Sophia to drive away from the ATM, he noticed she was bleeding. He was scared she might lose consciousness, so he moved to the driver's seat. Will dared to claim that he shot Sophia because she started making advances toward him, which made him uncomfortable. He said he fainted from fear, and when he woke up, she was lying on the ground, and he didn't know whether she was alive or dead. Terrified, he drove to the hospital, where Mike told him what to do next. The investigators didn't believe him, but they had his confession, and for the moment, that was enough. The police searched Will's parents' house and found the remaining black clothes, sneakers that left prints in the desert, and the revolver. Although the expert couldn't confirm that it was the weapon used in the murder, Will's DNA matched that of the rapist. Both men, William Joseph Berkeley and Mike Hackus, were charged with murder. Before the trial began, the prosecutor stated that they would seek the death penalty for Will. In Texas, these are not empty words. While in other states, a convicted person may pass away from natural causes before being executed, in Texas, the death penalty by lethal injection is a very real threat. Will was terrified and withdrew his confession. He claimed that he and Mike had only planned to commit the robbery, but their plans were interrupted by 4 girls. They picked him up when he was hitchhiking, and he went with them. Will argued that his only mistake was signing the confessions at the police station. Without glasses, he couldn't read what was written, and since his lawyer wasn't present, he thought he was signing a request to have a lawyer provided to him. Did he really think anyone would believe that? The trial of William began in April 2002. It should have been a triumph of justice for Sophia, but once again, her memory and her family were subjected to another insult. Will's father took the witness stand, stating that his son and Sophia had actually known each other. They had dated in the winter of 2000, but not for long. He said that a month before Sophia's death, his son had brought her home, and he remembered her because she was pretty, unlike the other girls his son had dated. Perhaps his current girlfriend and the mother of his daughter appreciated hearing that. However, Sophia never appeared at their house again, and his father asked his son why. Will claimed it was because of Sophia's family. He alleged that Sophia didn't want to introduce him to her family because he had a daughter. So they broke up. Needless to say, Sophia's family denied this, and it's unclear what the father of the accused hoped to achieve by saying this, as if their brief acquaintance could somehow mitigate the murder. However, it became clear what kind of people Will's family were made of. The jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death, despite his mother's pleas to spare her son. Mike Hackus was also found guilty, but was sentenced to life in prison. He must serve at least 40 years before he can apply for parole. On April 22, 2010, Will was executed. He gave an interview just before his death, but showed no remorse for the crime. He said that he felt sorry for the murdered girl, but he did not kill her. Some might argue that someone like Will wouldn't have been able to stay under the radar for long and would have been caught for another crime. But thanks to Heather, no one else suffered at the hands of Will and Mike. The police believe that without her intervention, the case could have gone unsolved. Since the crime occurred so close to the border, detectives had begun to believe that the killer had crossed it and they would never trace his whereabouts. Heather received a reward, which she likely needed, as after her husband's arrest, she was left to care for 3 young children. Unfortunately, Heather passed away in 2016 at the age of only 35. As for Sophia's family, they are left with only memories, personal belongings, and photos of the girl, including one taken for her upcoming graduation, never knowing that Sophia would never appear in that photo and that she would forever be 18 years old. This photograph serves as a reminder of what Sophia was robbed of, a happy future for which she had worked so hard and was so sure of. Early in the morning on July 31, 2022, the peaceful suburb of Cleveland, Ohio became the scene of a terrible tragedy, a horrific car crash. 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla was returning from a party when she lost control of her car and slammed at high speed into a brick building. The impact was so powerful that the vehicle was completely destroyed, reduced to a mangled heap of metal. Miraculously, Mackenzie survived, but sadly, she wasn't alone in the car. Next to her, authorities discovered her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and Dominic's best friend, Davian Flanagan. An endlessly long 45 minutes passed before, at 6:15 a.m., a passerby noticed the wrecked car and called 911. When emergency services arrived, They found all three people unconscious, trapped in the twisted frame of the vehicle. Firefighters had to literally cut the victims out of the car. For Davian and Dominic, there was nothing that could be done. They were already gone. Amazingly, Mackenzie, who had been behind the wheel, was still alive. Perhaps it helped that the car first hit a roadside sign, causing the airbag to deploy before the vehicle crashed into the building. Or maybe it was just sheer luck. Still, Mackenzie was seriously injured and was airlifted to the nearest hospital. There, her blood was tested to determine whether she was under the influence of drugs or alcohol. When Mackenzie regained consciousness in the hospital, she was overwhelmed by a wave of horror and guilt over what had happened. According to the medical staff, she blamed herself for the crash and even said she wanted to die. However, she couldn't recall the accident itself, as she had blacked out. While police were trying to piece together what had happened, rumors began spreading through the town. Everyone was asking the same questions. How did this happen? Was there another car on the road that forced Mackenzie to swerve? How did she lose control? What had been going on inside the car? And why were these young people even on that street so early in the morning, where they had no real reason to be? But soon more information emerged. Information that could explain why. The town's residents had mixed feelings about the tragedy. Some believed it was nothing more than a terrible, tragic accident. But those who knew Mackenzie and Dominic better suspected that things weren't as simple as they seemed, and that this may have been something far more sinister. Dominic Russo was 20 years old. He was a kind, compassionate, and deeply loved son and brother. Having graduated from Strongsville High School in Ohio, Dominic was exploring different paths, writing music, producing for a local band, and successfully running his own clothing line. But he dreamed of something bigger in life, which led him to make the decision to join the military. Though his family worried about him choosing such a dangerous path, they respected his desire to serve and help others beyond the borders of his hometown. Overall, Dominic had big plans for his future, and it was becoming clear that those plans didn't seem to include Mackenzie. Mackenzie and Dominic started dating in 2021 while Dominic was still in high school. Their relationship was intense and tumultuous. Mackenzie wasn't the type of girl to keep her personal life private. She flooded social media with endless photos of her and her boyfriend. To outsiders, their relationship seemed perfect, but it didn't take long for cracks to show. People who knew Mackenzie from school described her as selfish, egocentric, and used to always getting her way. She had never been held accountable for her actions. Things always seemed to work out in her favor, but unexpectedly, she couldn't make Dominic dance to her tune. Unlike others, he wasn't willing to indulge her every whim, which frustrated her and made her increasingly demanding and irritable. For example, Dominic once recorded a video where Mackenzie could be heard threatening to scratch his car with a key if he didn't let her into his house. He didn't take her threats seriously, but her behavior ultimately led to a temporary breakup that lasted several months. During that time, Mackenzie was all over the place, desperately begging Dominic to take her back one moment and making threats the next. She was solely focused on getting what she wanted, and Dominic's feelings didn't seem to matter. Eventually, she changed her approach. Instead of pushing for constant meetings or emotional outbursts, she started acting calm and rational again. And it worked. The two reconciled. At first, only their closest friends and family knew about their reunion, but soon they decided there was no reason to keep it a secret. On July 30th, 2022, Mackenzie and Dominic went to a party together with a small group of friends. Among those at the party was 19-year-old Davian Flanagan. Davian was Dominic's best friend. Little is known about his early childhood, as he and his two younger sisters spent time in foster care before being adopted by the Flanagan family. But in a loving home, Davian truly blossomed. Just like Dominic, Davian was driven and incredibly talented. He was a standout player on his high school football team, and after graduation, he planned to become a hairstylist and open his own salon. But he also knew how to have fun, which is how he ended up at the same party that Mackenzie and Dominic attended that night. Everyone there agreed the friends were having a great time, and people were happy to see Mackenzie and Dominic back together. After the party, a little after 5 a.m., the group decided it was time to head home. It's unclear whether Davian asked for a ride or if Dominic offered, but either way, all three of them got into the car. Mackenzie was behind the wheel of her Toyota Camry. At first, everything seemed normal as they drove, but after turning onto a road that dead-ended at an abandoned brick building, the car suddenly accelerated and crashed straight into the wall. After the accident, police discovered illegal substances and a small digital scale in Mackenzie's pocket. Friends from the party also confirmed that Mackenzie had been using drugs that night. Rumors started swirling immediately. Many claimed this wasn't the first time Mackenzie had used something. and they weren't surprised the night ended the way it did. Whispers spread that it was only a matter of time before Mackenzie seriously hurt someone, because in the end she always cared only about herself. These were just rumors that didn't mean much at the time, but everything changed when it became clear that the police weren't going to let Mackenzie walk away without consequences this time. Behind the scenes, investigators had been working tirelessly and uncovered undeniable evidence proving this wasn't just an accident or a crash caused by drug use. It was a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. On November 4th, 2022, Mackenzie was arrested. According to the case files, she faced 18 charges. She was accused of the murders of Davion and Dominic, reckless driving, possession of illegal substances, and several other crimes. Shockingly, it turned out that just a few weeks earlier, on July 19, 2022, Mackenzie had broken into a church and vandalized it. Now she was also facing charges of vandalism. While that may have been the least of her problems, in court, every additional accusation would only work against her. Her bail was set at $500,000, but her family didn't post it, so Mackenzie remained behind bars awaiting trial. Because she was a minor at the time, no details of the case were initially released. However, in March 2023, prosecutors and the judge agreed to try her as an adult, and with that decision, the full case files were made public. On July 19, 2023, nearly a year after the horrific crash, the first preliminary hearing took place. Mackenzie pleaded not guilty. Her bail was extended, but once again, she didn't pay it and remained in jail awaiting trial. During the hearing, it was revealed that the prosecutor offered her a plea deal, reducing the charges to just 3, with murder as the primary charge and the others dropped. But surprisingly, Mackenzie refused the deal, and her lawyer confirmed they were prepared to go to trial. Mackenzie and her defense team also made the strategic decision to waive the jury trial and have her case decided by a judge. Defendants have the right to do this if they want the verdict to rely solely on the law, not the potential emotions of a jury. This choice also significantly speeds up the trial process, and indeed, the entire trial was over in just 4 days. The trial began on August 7th, just 5 days after Mackenzie's 19th birthday. The main evidence presented by the prosecution were videos captured by surveillance cameras positioned along the route of Mackenzie's car. These videos showed that everything had been done intentionally and the situation was under her control. In one clip, Mackenzie is seen approaching a turn at a regular speed, slowing down, signaling where she was turning, and calmly making the turn. But as soon as she reached the street where the accident happened, she accelerated to 160 kilometers per hour and literally crashed into a brick building. Specialists examined the electronics in her car and found that she didn't even try to brake, making no attempt to slow the vehicle down. When they pulled her out of the car, her fluffy pink Prada sandal was pressed into the gas pedal. Apparently, she took the title of the film, The Devil Wears Prada, as a literal instruction for action. The defense, of course, insisted that this was a tragic accident, not a deliberate crime. The issue was that a second before the tragedy, someone sharply turned the steering wheel to the right. Mackenzie's lawyer built his defense on the idea that one of the guys might have realized the girl was in distress, lost consciousness, and tried to avoid the accident. Or maybe she herself tried to regain control of the car. Furthermore, it was dark, and she might not have seen that she was turning straight into a wall. In any case, this only suggests that it was an unfortunate accident. But the prosecution had more tricks up its sleeve. The prosecutor spoke about the events leading up to the accident. Mackenzie had managed to rekindle her relationship with Dominic, but for the vengeful girl, this was no longer enough. Refusing to obediently do everything she wanted, he signed his own death sentence. Mackenzie was determined to ensure that Dominic would never be able to leave her again. The lawyer insisted that witnesses at the party hadn't noticed any arguments between the young people. But this only served as evidence that the girl had been planning everything for a long time. As shown by the analysis of her phone, 3 days before the accident, Mackenzie had been near that brick building. But this was a business district with only company offices to which the girl had no connection, and she lived quite far from there. So what was she doing there? She was scouting and devising a plan. She chose the perfect time when the whole city was asleep, a road that no one would be on at that hour and would not interfere with her speeding up the car, and a spot for the accident where they wouldn't be found for a while after the crash, meaning no one would have a chance to survive. Of course, the main target of the murder was her boyfriend, Dominic, and Damien just wanted to be dropped off at home. Nothing more, but he became another victim because Mackenzie had no intention of changing her plans. Clearly, she was ready to die herself, but she survived. Her lawyer argued that she never had such thoughts, but when she woke up in the hospital after the accident, medics heard her confess her desire to die. Other witnesses also testified at the trial, hearing Mackenzie's threats directed at her boyfriend, and since he initially laughed off her threats, they became more specific. One witness recalled that, in a fit of rage, the girl shouted at her boyfriend, "Dominic, I'm going to crash this car." This scared the boy so much that he called a friend and asked him to drive him, just so he wouldn't have to be in the car with Mackenzie. And 2 weeks later, Mackenzie did indeed crash the car, with Dominic inside. Could this really be considered a coincidence? Of course, during the trial, the families of the victims testified about the pain they felt from the loss of Davion and Dominic. Dominic's mother shared that when she found out about her son and Davion's deaths, and that Mackenzie had been taken to the hospital, she called Mackenzie's mother, Natalie. The first thing she said was, "Don't believe everything they write on social media." The woman was shocked. Her son had died. His friend had died. She called to inquire about her daughter's health, but all that mattered to Natalie were some posts on social media. Natalie Chiarello also spoke on behalf of Mackenzie. The woman, somewhat insincerely, apologized to the victims' families, after which she began to dispute everything the prosecution had said about her daughter. The judge interrupted her, saying that she was only talking about Mackenzie but hadn't said a word about the other victims, to which Natalie awkwardly began explaining that Davion was a new friend of her daughter. The judge immediately asked, "And does that make his death any less significant?" It seems that the mother's testimony only worsened her daughter's situation because, according to many, her behavior was yet another example of how she always excused and shielded her daughter's bad behavior. And it was precisely because of the permissiveness in Mackenzie's family that she grew up to be so selfish. The girl was rude to many people and behaved arrogantly, and if her social media hadn't been hidden, people would have seen the real her. Of course, she insisted that it had been an unfortunate accident and had her own version of what happened. Mackenzie's mother had her own version of events. She said that in 2017, her daughter was diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. Many people are familiar with the feeling of standing up too quickly after sitting for a long time, when your vision dims, your heart rate increases slightly, and you feel a bit weak. People suffering from this syndrome experience something similar, only more frequently and intensely. They can suffer from dizziness and sudden loss of consciousness. According to her mother, her daughter lost consciousness just before the accident. However, she didn't present any medical documents to support this. Moreover, when the girl was just getting her driver's license, she denied any medical conditions, and her mother signed a statement confirming this. After the accident, Mackenzie renewed her driver's license and once again denied having any medical conditions. Obviously, the ability to drive was more important to her than the deaths of two people because, when the police questioned her in the hospital, she asked, "Can you take my license away for 10 years or something like that?" It's surprising that she continued to drive despite her mother's words about her possibly fainting at any moment. If driving really posed a danger to her, no mother in the world would have allowed her to drive again. This heartlessness didn't stop Mackenzie there. Even while in the hospital, she and her mother were corresponding with a Los Angeles modeling agency that offered Mackenzie a job. After she was discharged, she attended a concert in a wheelchair and, together with her friends, filmed provocative videos in which she called herself the type of girl for whom any guy would be willing to die and who could take illegal substances and not die. So perhaps she did feel deep down that she had done something wrong and was really starting to leave the house only after her mother's persistent requests. But all her actions and words spoke otherwise. 4 days into the trial, the prosecutor and the defense attorney presented their closing arguments. If Mackenzie and her lawyer had hoped that by waiving the jury trial she would not be found guilty, they were wrong. During the delivery of the verdict, the judge stated that this was not a case of careless driving. It was murder. Mackenzie had planned everything in advance. How they would go to a party, have a great time, and when they would be coming back home. She would get behind the wheel and accelerate on an empty road. She chose the date just 1 day before her 18th birthday and the time, 5 a.m., when people in their small town were just preparing for the day to begin. And she chose the perfect target, a brick house that would completely destroy the car, leaving no survivors. Speaking about Mackenzie's behavior behind the wheel, the judge said that when she sped down that street towards her target, she transformed from a responsible driver into a hell on wheels. The judge found her guilty. The only question was whether she would serve a sentence for the murders of Dominic and Davion concurrently or separately. In the end, the judge sentenced her to imprisonment for a term of 15 years to life for each murder, to be served concurrently. That means she will be 34 years old when she first comes before the parole board, but according to the judge, it would be a miracle if she were released on parole the first time. There is one more point that should be mentioned when discussing this case. When the accident occurred, Mackenzie was driving a Toyota Camry, a model that had previously been associated with issues of sudden and unintended acceleration. In 2014, Toyota agreed to pay $1.2 billion to avoid accusations of concealing serious safety issues with their cars and expedited the recall of vehicles. The company had to admit that it had misled American consumers about two safety issues affecting the cars. In 2019, the U.S. Department of Transportation made a statement about Toyota, stating that NASA engineers found no issues in the car's electronics that could lead to unintended acceleration. The two mechanical defects discovered more than a year ago remain one of the known causes of such incidents. Because of these two defects, the company recalled nearly 8 million cars in the U.S. naturally. All of this happened long before 2022, and this issue was not even brought up during the trial. It was just a striking coincidence. Davion Flanagan and Dominic Rossi had bright futures ahead of them, futures that were taken away in a split second. Dominic's father acted much more nobly than the Shirella family and said that Mackenzie was just a child who made a terrible mistake, and he hoped she would receive the help she needed. However, even he didn't believe that Mackenzie remembered nothing of the accident. For now, they can only wonder what happened in those last seconds in the car. Did they scream when they realized what Mackenzie was about to do? Did they try to stop her or beg for mercy? The story of Mackenzie and Dominic starts with what could be called an ideal relationship, but in reality, it was nothing more than an illusion. Few murderers can be called as dangerous as someone who is willing to die along with their victims. When a person is driven by emotions, at first they may seem incredibly interesting and attractive because they take relationships to a new level. But in the end, such people always rush down a road to nowhere. Medford is a small town near Boston, Massachusetts. Though small, it packs a punch. This town has captured the nation's attention more than once. Amelia Earhart, the first female pilot to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean, was born here. One of the largest bank heists in history also took place in Medford, when 5 men, including 3 former police officers, broke into a neighboring office and drilled a hole through a thick concrete wall. They then bored through 50 centimeters of concrete to reach the bank's vault. The robbers opened over 700 safety deposit boxes and stole $100 million in cash, gold, silver, and other valuables. Medford was also home to a regular family-owned restaurant, Bickford's, serving traditional American breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, a place where co-workers became enemies, where friendly smiles and sympathy turned into harassment, vandalism, assault, and ultimately led to one of the most notorious cases in Massachusetts history. Sandra, or Sandy Burfield, was in her early 20s when she moved to Everett, Massachusetts in 1988 to be closer to her sister, Sheila. She got a job as a waitress at Bickford's restaurant in Medford. Sandy was quickly hired because she was a very beautiful young woman with almond-shaped eyes and a thick mane of hair. She also had a knack for making friends easily. In the restaurant business, being outgoing and friendly is incredibly important, and the manager was very pleased with her. Apart from the occasional tardiness, there were no complaints about her work. She was sociable, great at connecting with people, and an incredibly kind person. Sometimes a homeless man would come into the restaurant and Sandy would feed him steak and breakfast from her own tips. She knew all too well that not everyone had it easy in life. At 16, she gave birth to a little girl named Diane, who was born with spina bifida. Sandy desperately wanted to spend all her free time with her daughter, but she needed to work, and Diane required constant care. Sandy had to place her daughter in a specialized clinic, but visited her whenever she could. Among Sandy's colleagues was Stephen Caruso. Stephen was studying photography, had a passion for computers, and had been a regular at the restaurant for 6 years, sometimes visiting a couple of times a day. He enjoyed the good food and casual chats with the staff. In 1993, the restaurant manager hired Steve as a handyman. He was highly skilled with his hands and excelled in various repair tasks, electrical work, plumbing, carpentry. Steve could do it all. But as talented as he was with his hands, he was equally strange in his interactions with others. Meanwhile, to save up for a car and visit her daughter more often, Sandy took a second job at a bar. She worked twice as much, but enjoyed both jobs, and now she had two sources of income. The bar became her second home. Sandy often spent time there even when she wasn't working. Tony Markin, a longtime friend, also liked to visit the bar. For many years, Sandy and Tony had been close friends, and after 8 years of knowing each other, they finally started dating. It happened naturally, as if they had always been meant to be together. Sandy's co-workers from the restaurant also liked to stop by the bar after work to have a drink. It was a great time for everyone, except for one dark cloud, Steve's behavior. He always came alone and acted inappropriately with the women, staring at them with a creepy, unsettling gaze. At the restaurant, Steve had his favorite waitresses. People joked that he changed them like gloves. He would specifically come in during their shifts and sit only at tables they were serving. The waitresses knew he was a bit odd but tolerated it. In 1996, it was Sandy's turn to become his favorite. Up until August 1998, their interactions were unremarkable. Sandy considered their relationship casual, almost friendly. In August 1997, Sandy's daughter Diane passed away, a devastating tragedy for her mother. After the loss, Sandy tried to be even kinder to everyone and didn't look down on people who behaved strangely. She became more patient, forgiving, and motherly, showing unconditional love to all. She also extended this friendly compassion to Steve. It's possible that Steve misinterpreted Sandy's vulnerability after her daughter's death and her friendliness toward him. He hovered around her, no matter what she was doing. While having a regular customer in the restaurant is generally a good thing, Steve became a distraction for Sandy when she was trying to take other customers' orders. In short, he paid too much attention to Sandy and was overly intrusive, which turned into a problem. At the end of August 1998, Steve began taking more assertive actions, inviting Sandy to see a movie at the theater. She politely declined the offer, but Steve didn't stop trying to impress her. He even went as far as washing Sandy's car without her permission. He continued to sit in his usual spot, watching Sandy without taking his eyes off her, smirking the entire time. Even Sandy's patience eventually ran out, and she started trying to minimize her interactions with him. After her repeated requests, the restaurant manager asked Steve to sit at a table in a different section of the restaurant. On August 24, 1998, Sandy was spending time at the home of one of her older sisters. Somehow, Steven found out she would be there and showed up uninvited. Without opening the door, Sandy told Steve to leave. She was home alone and became very frightened. Around that time, Sandy started keeping a journal, documenting all the strange incidents involving Steve. It seemed she had a bad feeling about the situation and wanted to leave a record of his persistent and unsettling behavior. Sandy decided not to let things slide and took the initiative. Among the restaurant's regulars was a police officer, and Sandy asked him to have a word with Steven. In the middle of the day, in front of all the customers, the officer approached Steven and demanded that he stop bothering Sandy. Steven felt humiliated. He rushed to the restaurant manager and threatened to file a lawsuit for discrimination. He also demanded a meeting with Sandy outside of the restaurant. Steven even called the headquarters of the company that owned the restaurant, claiming that his conversation with the police officer had been insulting and demanded that Sandy be fired. He went on to say that Sandy was mentally unstable and offered to pay for her psychiatric treatment. However, the headquarters repeated that he was not allowed to sit at her table and Sandy would no longer serve him. At that point, it seemed like Steven should have let the situation go and started eating at a different restaurant. Even in a small town, there were plenty of other options. But no, he continued to frequent the same restaurant, sitting in the same dining area, though not at Sandy's table. The way the restaurant was set up, though, allowed him to see her no matter where he sat, even though there were 3 separate dining areas. So even sitting in a different section, Steven's eyes still followed Sandy, and his face burned with anger. Thus began an open hostility between the two colleagues. Sandy asked the restaurant to ban him from the premises. However, Steven threatened to sue if they did, and the lawyers confirmed that he had the right to stay. Refusing him service would be illegal. This tense situation could have dragged on even longer, but at the end of September, Steven truly crossed the line for the first time. He turned to vandalism. On the night of September 27, 1998, someone slashed all the tires on Sandy's car. There were no witnesses to the incident, and although Sandy suspected Steve, she had no proof. Theoretically, it could also have been her boyfriend, with whom she had temporarily broken up. But on the night of September 30th, 1998, just before dawn, while Sandy was lying on the couch at home, she heard someone trying to puncture her tires again. She looked out the window of her second-floor apartment. She noticed someone walking away from her car. He was dressed all in black and wearing a hood, so she couldn't see his face. But she recognized Steve by his distinctive walk. The man seemed to slightly hop when walking, while swinging his left arm forward and backward. She reported the incident to the police and said she suspected Steve. Fearing further acts of vandalism, Sandy installed a surveillance camera that constantly filmed the street below. On October 4th, 1998, when she was about to leave for work, her car started acting up. The repairman discovered that someone had poured battery acid, electrolyte, into the fuel tank. When she returned home, Sandy watched the footage from the camera. The video clearly showed the vandal approaching her car at 3:15 a.m. Once again, Sandy recognized Steve by his distinctive walk, though. Like last time, he was dressed in black and wearing a hood. On October 25, 1998, around 2:15 a.m., someone once again poured the same liquid into Sandy's car's fuel tank. She was at home watching the act of vandalism on the monitor connected to the camera. First, a red car passed by her house. It was only partially visible, but Sandy knew Steve drove a similar car. 4 minutes later, from the direction where the red car had gone, a man in black clothing and a hood approached. His face was not visible. He was carrying something in his hand. The vandal approached Sandy's car, did something to the fuel tank, and returned in the same direction he had come from. At that moment, Sandy was calling 911. During the call, she ran downstairs to the first floor, from where she could observe the scene from a window in the hallway. As the man was leaving, he slightly turned his head for just a moment, but it was enough. She unmistakably identified Steve as the vandal. However, unfortunately, at that time, acts like this did not result in an arrest. Sandy realized that she needed the help of law enforcement and sought a restraining order to prevent Stephen from coming near her or her car. However, at that time, the law did not allow for action against a stalker unless the victim was in a relationship with them. If Sandy and Steve had been dating and then he started damaging her car, that would have been a different case. But since there had been no relationship between Sandy and Steve, except for possibly work-related interactions, Steve also worked part-time at the restaurant as a handyman, he could only face administrative consequences. That was the extent of what the law could offer her at the time. Sandy persisted and managed to get the restraining order. It prohibited Stephen from coming within 90 meters. The order also barred him from visiting her workplace, resulting in him losing his job at the restaurant. Sandy believed the law would protect her, but instead it only infuriated Stephen even more. He somehow convinced himself that Sandy was mocking him, which drove him into a rage. Stephen paid no attention to the legal restrictions, even when the court tightened the conditions of the restraining order, extending the distance he had to maintain from her apartment to 450 meters. Thanks to video footage, he was charged with 3 counts of criminal property damage, though the police couldn't prove that Stephen had slashed her tires the first time. Until his trial in January 1999, Stephen was released on bail. However, a couple of months later, he was seen driving back and forth around the restaurant while Sandy was working. His bail was revoked, and he was returned to jail until the trial. The court found Stephen guilty of criminal property damage. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison and an additional year of probation. He was required to undergo a psychiatric evaluation, stay away from Sandy and the restaurant, and pay $3,000 in restitution. Stephen's conviction was a huge relief for Sandy. She never complained, but it was clear that she could breathe easier and no longer felt the need to constantly look over her shoulder. However, as the day of his release approached, she became anxious and tense once again. Stephen was released on July 29, 1999. After his release, Sandy's boyfriend, Tony Marson, with whom she had resumed dating, gave her a folding knife for self-defense. She slept with the knife under her pillow and always kept it with her. After a while, she wrote in her diary, "A car stopped near the cafe. The driver looked inside. I saw it was Stephen." The stalker had returned. He knew the distance he needed to keep from Sandy so that she couldn't do anything about it. He often stood across the street, watching her through the window. He was out there when she left work. He appeared out of nowhere, tormenting her with phone calls. He would call and breathe heavily into the receiver. Since, according to the caller ID, Steve was calling from a payphone, it was impossible to prove it was him, but no one else had any reason to do such a thing. Sandy felt like everything had started all over again. Her boyfriend Tony was getting fed up and was planning to confront Stephen. However, Sandy forbade him from intervening. She said, "If you touch him, I won't speak to you for the rest of my days." It should be noted that Sandy had many relatives and friends who were ready to stand up for her at any moment. She was the youngest of 15 children. She had 9 sisters and 5 brothers. Moreover, the employees of the restaurant and bar where she worked treated her like family, a close friend. All she had to do was hint at it, and they would have talked to Stephen immediately. But she firmly insisted that no one should intervene. Perhaps she was afraid that it would make things worse, like when she asked a police officer who frequented the restaurant to talk to Stephen. Or she was worried that the vengeful stalker would redirect his hatred towards someone close to her. It's unknown. In any case, she not only did not ask for help, but demanded that no one interfere. In December 1999, another alarming incident occurred. Sandy was about to start her morning shift at the restaurant when she opened the door to the establishment and smelled a strong odor of gas. If she had gone into the kitchen and turned on the stoves as required during opening hours, the restaurant would have exploded. The year 2000 arrived. On January 20th, in the middle of the day, the landlady of the house where Sandy lived noticed a package addressed to Sandy while picking up the mail. She read the sender's name and address. The package had come from Malden, from Lois, Sandy's older sister. The landlady took the mail and went back to her apartment, and just a few minutes later, she and her husband heard Sandy come down to the first floor, collect the package, and head back upstairs. Most likely, during his 6 months of imprisonment, Stephen had reached the limit of his rage. After his release, he was planning to take revenge. He had enough time to plan the attack. From a friend, he learned how to make a bomb, but assembling it was only half the job. He had to somehow get Sandy to open it. After the gas incident at the restaurant, she had become even more cautious than before. He needed to come up with something that wouldn't raise her suspicions. On his computer, Stephen installed a genealogy tree creation program to learn everything he could about Sandy. He discovered names, birth dates, workplaces, spouses, and children's names of all her relatives. In particular, he found the name of Lois's husband, who lived in Malden, a different town in Massachusetts. In fact, the family hadn't lived there for a long time, but their address hadn't been updated in the program. Stephen assembled the bomb from a pipe fitting, loaded it with gunpowder and shrapnel, and placed it in a box. It was designed to explode as soon as Sandy opened it. He wrote down the recipients' and senders' addresses, and on Thursday, January 20th, 2000, at 9:30 in the morning, he drove to Sandy's house. The man calmly approached, left the package on the doorstep of the apartment building, and likely stayed nearby. He could hardly resist the pleasure of seeing his victim take the package. Sandy would never have brought it into the house if the sender hadn't been her older sister, Lois. Sandy read the name on the package and probably didn't read any further. She allowed herself to relax, entered her apartment, and opened the box. The next thing Sandy's neighbors remember is that the house shook from the explosion in a terrible noise. They rushed upstairs. When they opened the girl's door, a foul odor hit them, and their eyes watered from the smoke. Sandy lay on the floor. They immediately contacted emergency services. The arriving police unmistakably recognized the smell of gunpowder. Cautiously, so as not to spoil the evidence, an officer opened the door. Blood and body parts covered the floor, walls, and even the ceiling of the apartment. Sandy lay at the end of the hallway. Hoping that the girl might still be alive, the officer called her name, but she did not respond. Sandra Burfield was dead at the age of 32. Most likely, Stephen was the last person to see his victim alive. Her loved ones and friends tried to find solace in the fact that she probably didn't realize what had happened. When Sandy's boyfriend Tony was called to be informed of the news, his sister answered the phone. She screamed hysterically, her legs giving way beneath her. She could only utter, "He got to her." No one doubted for a second who the killer was. Just 40 minutes after the explosion, the police were on their way to the suspect's house. When they arrived, they were struck by the fact that there was a huge photograph of Sandy hanging in every room. The man was interrogated, and his alibi kept changing. At first, he said he was at the library in the morning, then that he went to a cafe. Later, he reversed his story, saying he was first at the cafe and then at the library. However, when the detectives obtained a search warrant, they found everything necessary to make an explosive device. According to experts, it was the perfect homemade bomb. It worked exactly as the bomber intended. In cases of pipe bombs, it's common for the energy not to explode in the desired direction, meaning the victim might survive and even fully recover. Unfortunately, Steve turned out to be quite the handyman. After the police searched the man's house, Stephen's sister found a booklet on explosives and handed it over to the police. After Stephen's arrest, he was placed in a cell with another detainee, Michael Dubas. Michael recognized Steve because he had seen his photo in the news. He tried to ingratiate himself with the man. After an hour and a half of conversation, Michael learned everything he wanted to know. Steve made many incriminating statements, including things Michael couldn't have known from any other source. He described the actions of the bomb he had made, confessed to vandalizing Sandy's car, and mentioned that she had a recording of him doing it. He even explained how he found Sandy's sister's address to deceive her. The motive? He was angry with the girl for not wanting to date him. He referred to her with insulting words, and any previous adoration had completely vanished. Of course, Michael relayed all the details of the conversation to the police. The court hearing began with horrific details of the murder. Not a muscle in Steve's face twitched as everyone listened to what the bomb had done to the girl's body. The prosecution had enough evidence against him. Even the fact that he provided an incorrect address for Lois on the package worked in favor of the prosecution, as this incorrect address was successfully linked to the man's computer data. Stephen had perfectly chosen whose name to send the package from. Sandy's older sister Lois was collecting small plush toys at that time. The last in the series was about to be released. Sandy also liked it a lot, and Lois had promised to give her such a toy. The family believes Sandy thought it was that toy in the box, which is why she boldly brought it into the house, expecting a pleasant surprise from her sister that would lift her spirits. In August 2003, the 44-year-old man was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, and the appeal was denied. Sandy's family could not allow such a nightmare to happen to anyone else. They were shocked that the law would have better protected Sandy if the victim and her stalker had been in a relationship. Sandy's brother managed to meet with former Senator Pamela Reeser. She helped change the law to correct this oversight. A separate legislative act was introduced focusing on protective orders. It now considers stalking a crime rather than a misdemeanor. The law was passed in 2010 and was named the Sandy Law. Now victims have the opportunity to obtain a protective order that involves criminal liability for the stalker. Even if there was no relationship between the victim and the stalker, Sandy Burfield spent her life helping people, and this law, named in her honor, will now assist other victims of stalking.
In the quiet suburb of Harahan, Louisiana, USA, a tragedy unfolded, shattering the familiar world and ill that once prevailed on its peaceful streets. At the center of this story was young Bella Fontanelle, a 6-year-old girl, whose life was unexpectedly cut short in the one place where she should have felt truly safe. Today, she could have finished kindergarten, enjoyed summer days, and swam in the pool, but Bella won't be able to do any of that. Not today, not ever. Because her life was heartlessly taken away from her. Taken away by someone who should have loved her and cared for her. The circumstances surrounding her deaths seemed as terrifying as they were confusing until a video emerged, casting doubt on the closest person to the girl and revealing the truth about what happened on that warm April evening in 2023. Louisiana is a multicultural state, but even among this diverse backdrop, the family of Michael Fontanelle and Jennifer Celedon stood out. Michael was an American of French descent, while Jennifer had Honduran roots. Together, they brought two beautiful girls, Aria and Bella, but unfortunately, they soon decided to part ways. The separation was not easy, but Michael and Jennifer tried their best to ensure it wouldn't negatively impact their children. They agreed on shared custody of their daughters, and since their homes were just 2 blocks apart, Aria and Bella could comfortably live between both houses. After some time had passed since Michael and Jennifer's separation, Michael began dating another woman, with whom they eventually moved in together. Michael's new love interest was 43 years old, and she went by the name Bannock Lim, although she also referred to herself as Bannock Landon or Hannah Landon. While Hannah lived with Michael, she spent a lot of time with the girls. Although Michael and Hannah were not married, throughout the years she lived with him, she acted as a caring stepmother to the girls. She got along well with the children, especially Bella. They went on walks together, rode bicycles, and swam in the pool. That's how the family lived until April 2023. On April 25th, Michael had an extremely long and challenging day at work. He returned home late and was so exhausted that he went straight to the bedroom and fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. He didn't bother going into the girls' rooms, assuming they were already asleep. Hannah was not in the bedroom, but that didn't bother him since she often slept on the couch to avoid disturbing his rest. The next morning, when 7-year-old Aria Fontanelle woke up, she was thrilled that the Tooth Fairy had visited her during the night. The little girl couldn't wait to share her excitement with her younger sister. However, when she and her father entered Bella's room, her bed was empty. Michael thought Bella was playing hide and seek. He and Aria searched the house inside and out, but there was no sign of Bella or Hannah. Michael couldn't fathom where his girlfriend and 6-year-old daughter could have gone, leaving Aria behind. Harahan was known as a very safe place, with a population of less than 9,000 people where everyone knew each other. The idea of a crime happening there didn't even cross his mind. Nevertheless, at 7:30 in the morning, the worried father was already walking into the local police station to report the disappearance of his daughter and girlfriend. The police immediately got to work, starting with a search of the street where Michael and Hannah lived. At 8:20, the officers approached the home of Bella's mother, Jennifer, who lived 2 blocks away from Michael's house. They initially thought it would be a routine check, but as they entered the front yard, they noticed a large 38-liter plastic bucket, typically used for storing chemicals like chlorine for pool disinfection, placed conspicuously. Cautiously, they opened the bucket and recoiled in horror at what they found inside, the lifeless body of Bella Fontanelle. Jennifer was at home that morning, but fortunately, she hadn't stepped outside and made the horrifying discovery. It's difficult to imagine the agony a mother would experience finding her daughter's body in a bucket on the very same yard where Bella loved to play with her sister. The police immediately launched a murder investigation. But where was Hannah, and what had happened to her? Was she the next victim on the list of this deranged killer? Now, the police had to not only investigate Bella's murder, but also the possible abduction of Hannah. The situation was becoming increasingly distressing and complicated. While the officers were investigating these 2 cases, they received footage from surveillance cameras on Jennifer and Michael's street. Many neighbors provided access to their cameras for the police. One of the recordings was particularly chilling. At 9:33, the video showed a woman in a red blouse, black pants, and white shoes calmly walking towards Jennifer's house. She was pushing a cart with a white plastic bucket on it, identical to the one in which Bella was found. Despite carrying a suspicious cargo, she appeared calm and didn't even get flustered or attempt to move away when a car passed by her. In the meantime, the police managed to locate Hannah. She was found in a hospital as a patient, awaiting a medical evaluation regarding her mental health. Interestingly, it was the police themselves who had taken her to the hospital. Hannah appeared disoriented and lost when she showed up at the police station late at night on Wednesday, nearly after midnight. She seemed to be in distress, stating that she had family problems and needed to hug her mother and grandmother. However, she refused to elaborate on the nature of these family issues. The officers interacted with her for about 2 hours before calling for an ambulance. They then transported her to the East Jefferson General Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. It remains unclear why the police spent so much time trying to locate someone they eventually took to the hospital themselves. Possibly, different police units did not connect the cases, or there might have been confusion due to Hannah using different names. Nevertheless, she was immediately detained and brought back to the police station for questioning because she was the woman seen in the video transporting the plastic bucket to Jennifer's house. Hannah was still wearing the same outfit as in the video, a pink blouse, black pants, and white shoes, which matched the clothing of the woman on the footage. Detectives seized these items as evidence and handed them over to the forensic analysts for further analysis. The matter seemed tangled until the police uncovered a long history between Hannah and Jennifer. The relationship between the women could hardly be called friendly, even with a lot of strain. Things escalated to the point where police intervention was necessary. On August 8, 2021, at the Riverside Country Club, Aria and Bella were competing in a swimming competition. Jennifer and her sister Evelyn came to support the girls. According to the police report, which was called due to the women's argument, when one of the girls finished her part of the program, Jennifer approached to hug her daughter and tell her what a good job she did. A normal thing to do. However, this didn't sit well with Hannah, who caused a commotion by stating that it was a day for the girls to spend with Michael. In her opinion, if it was Michael's week, all family members from the mother's side should ignore Aria and Bella, not even come close to them. As absurd as it may sound, Hannah firmly believed in this. Evelyn complained about Hannah's behavior to Michael, who, of course, agreed that a mother should be allowed to congratulate her child after a successful performance in a competition. Yet, Hannah didn't back down. She took out her phone and started recording. There was no sense or necessity in capturing the ridiculous argument unfolding before the children. Evelyn raised her hand and asked Hannah to stop. She didn't attempt to grab the phone, she probably just wanted to shield herself from the camera. However, this action triggered Hannah. She slapped Evelyn's hand, and in response, Evelyn asked her not to do that again. This made Hannah grab Evelyn's hair. The two women engaged in a physical struggle, pulling each other's hair until bystanders intervened to separate them. The police arrived at the scene and noticed scratches under Evelyn's left eye and on her left hand. Her face was slightly swollen and bleeding. When the officers asked Hannah to explain what happened, she refused to talk to them until they threatened to arrest her. Then she claimed that she just wanted to take one of the girls out of the pool because she was cold. Out of nowhere, Evelyn approached her from behind, turned her face toward her, and attacked her. Hannah allegedly took out her phone to capture the attack on her. But when the officers asked the woman to provide her phone number, she claimed that she doesn't use a mobile phone, just like Michael. She stated that people contact her through email. However, Michael immediately provided his phone number. Hannah complained about back pain but refused to go to a separate area to document her injuries. She didn't behave like someone who had been assaulted and would typically seek to gather all possible evidence. Unlike the consistent accounts of Evelyn and Jennifer, Hannah had no one to support her version of events because Michael was on the other side of the pool. Moreover, it was hard for the police to believe someone who lied about something as simple as having a phone. A little over a month after the swimming competition, Hannah decided that she needed a restraining order to prevent Jennifer and Evelyn from approaching her. In her statement, she described the poolside argument, but her version was radically different from what she initially told the officers. Supposedly, on that day, Jennifer came up to her from behind and aggressively pushed her until Michael separated them. She also added that Evelyn pulled, kicked, and pushed her. In her statement, Hannah also recalled another altercation between her and Jennifer that occurred on March 17, 2021. During a soccer game, Jennifer approached her from behind again, grabbed her wrist sharply, pulled her towards her, and said, "I will make you hurt." The court reviewed Hannah's application in August 2021, and denied her the restraining order. It's not surprising, as she acted illogically. Why would she wait until mid-July if the attacks happened in March and June? Besides, she told the police two different versions of what happened. But the police are not her friends, they create an official report, and if she really wanted the judge to believe her and take her side, she should have stuck to one version. In any case, since 2021, the relationship between Hannah and Jennifer had remained tense, but outwardly everything seemed normal, and didn't involve law enforcement. Until that April morning in 2023. On April 25, 2023, the girls' paternal grandmother picked up Bella and Aria after their activities and took them out for a snack. Together, they visited the library and then brought lunch to their father at work. Later, the grandmother brought the girls back home, helped them take a bath, and put them to bed. She left her son's house at 7:30 p.m. and didn't notice any signs of imminent problems between Hannah and the children. According to the grandmother, if she had noticed anything, she wouldn't have left. The next confirmed information is that at around 9:30 p.m., Hannah left her home carrying a large plastic bucket from the side of the house. She loaded the bucket onto a cart, calmly wheeled it down the street, and left it in front of Jennifer's house. She then returned home with the cart. Shortly after, she came out again, buried some object in the yard of neighbors living a few houses away from her. Detectives later found out that it was Hannah's phone wrapped in a plastic bag. The phone had been buried, so the investigators couldn't trace its ping while looking for Hannah. However, after digging up the phone, they found out that just before burying the device, Hannah had been searching for a criminal defense attorney online. After that, she went to the police station, from where they took her to the hospital. By the time Michael Fontanelle returned home around 9:45 p.m., Bella's body was already in Jennifer's yard. He blamed himself severely for not checking his daughter's room when he returned home from work, even though he wouldn't have been able to help her at that point. Michael and Jennifer's neighbors were in shock from the incident. They remembered Bella, who often rode bikes with her sister on the street. They recalled her as a shy but friendly, well-mannered girl and couldn't believe that someone could put her body in a bucket. The fact that it was a 38-liter bucket fueled rumors of dismemberment, but the coroner refuted these rumors. He spoke at a press conference and stated that Bella's cause of death was manual strangulation, along with multiple blunt force injuries to the head. After her death, her lifeless body was placed in the bucket. Blood smears of Hannah were found on the bucket. She had a wound on her left hand. Blood was also discovered on the kitchen table, and in the backyard of Michael's house. Investigators are still examining the evidence related to the case. On June 29, 2023, a preliminary hearing took place, during which Hannah was charged with first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. Under Louisiana law, if found guilty, she could face the death penalty. At the moment, she is being held in custody without the possibility of bail. The motive in this case has not been revealed yet, but based on the history of Hannah's relationship with Jennifer, one can speculate that it might have been driven by revenge. Hannah placed the bucket in front of Jennifer's house, presumably hoping that Bella's mother would be the one to discover the body. It's unimaginable what emotions Jennifer must have experienced, thinking her children were safe and asleep while tragedy unfolded. As far as is known, there were no clear signs that Hannah was on the verge of a breakdown. Although the girls occasionally referred to Hannah as mean and expressed dissatisfaction with staying at their father's house, there is no evidence that she had ever harmed or threatened them. Michael always believed that Hannah loved the girls, especially Bella, but her hatred for Jennifer proved stronger than her love for Bella. And ultimately, Bella paid the price for something she had no connection to. According to the police, neither Michael nor Jennifer had any involvement in the crime, although it's likely that Hannah's lawyers will try to somehow implicate Michael in the incident. This is evident from the fact that during the preliminary hearing, Hannah's attorney presented a police report from 2019, in which Jennifer claimed that Michael had threatened her. Jennifer also accused the girl's father of holding a gun to her head when she was pregnant. It remains unclear how this information will help Hannah's defense. Perhaps she will attempt to argue that she committed the crime at Michael's instigation, or his cruelty pushed her into a nervous breakdown. But at this point, these are only speculations. On the Thursday following Bella's murder, a service was held, attended by over 600 people. On that day, the children were supposed to have outdoor competitions, but the activities were cancelled. Instead of allowing the kids to have fun and play outside, the parents had to explain to them what had happened and why Bella wouldn't be able to study with them anymore. Michael and Jennifer also attended the service and found the strength to talk to the children who had been in the same kindergarten as Bella, encouraging them despite the nightmare they were going through. Since all this happened at the end of April, it's likely that Bella's kindergarten had prepared and already distributed photographs of the future graduates to the parents, including Michael and Jennifer. It's difficult to imagine the agony of the girls' family as they looked at the pictures of Bella's graduation, knowing that she would never finish kindergarten, and would always be just 6 years old. Jennifer's sister, Bianca, wrote very touching words about her niece: "The world is so unfair. You were gifted to us for 6 amazing years. You were simply perfect. Your wonderful voice, cheerful nature, how you danced, how delicate and vulnerable you were, your smile, your laughter, the way you expressed yourself. I could talk endlessly about how amazing this little soul was.
Thailand. Considering its captivating cultural landmarks and magnificent landscapes, it's easy to understand why many tourists love to return here every year. Koh Sichang. It is located in close proximity to the country's capital, Bangkok, but is not as widely known among tourists. While its counterparts enjoy popularity among vacationers, Koh Sichang still heavily relies on the fishing industry, which remains its main source of income. However, do not let this impression deceive you. This doesn't stop the island from being a welcoming place for travelers, especially those seeking something more authentically Thai. And in March 2019, one of those who went to the island for its authentic atmosphere was 26-year-old Miriam Bildt. Miriam came from the city of Hildesheim, Germany. She was a very determined young woman, knowing what she wanted from life. Her extraordinary intellect allowed her to graduate from school with the highest grades and enroll at the University of Hanover in the mechanical engineering faculty. Given the automotive industry boom in Germany, specialists with her level of intelligence and education were in high demand. After another 5 years of education, she easily secured a position at a small company. However, by the middle of 2018, her work caught the attention of ISI, and she was offered a position as an engineer designer. While working in Hildesheim, Miriam could continue living with her parents, saving money for her own house. ISI collaborated with partners and suppliers from many countries around the world, which entailed numerous business trips for Miriam. And it happened that in 2019, the company sent her to several suppliers in Southeast Asia. Miriam enjoyed traveling the world, but a trip is not as interesting if it's all business. Therefore, she decided that this time she would combine work and leisure and spend a few extra days in Thailand. She had always heard about its white sandy beaches, ancient temples, and diverse, delicious cuisine. With such thoughts in mind, she set out on her journey. After wrapping up all her work matters, she boarded a plane to the country's capital, Bangkok. Of course, traveling alone can involve certain risks, but Miriam had already visited many countries. She took care to be cautious and not take unnecessary risks. For instance, she wouldn't go out alone in the evening, kept her valuables close, and was wary of strangers. In other words, Miriam was aware that she was a young and attractive woman traveling alone, but she didn't allow that fact to dictate her journey. She arrived in Bangkok, where she confidently roamed around and basked in the sun. Soon, she made her way to the city of Pattaya, located on the eastern side of Thailand, from where she planned a short trip to Koh Sichang. On Sunday, April 7, 2019, a ferry took Miriam to Koh Sichang Island. Her plan was simple and unpretentious. She wanted to sample local seafood, visit a few ancient temples scattered across the island, and immerse herself in the lively island atmosphere. Disembarking on Koh Sichang shortly after noon, Miriam rented a moped, a very popular means of transportation in Thailand. Mapping out her route with the help of Google Maps, she set off on her journey. After parking the moped and exchanging greetings with a flower vendor at the foot of the hill, the girl leisurely started ascending the steps towards the temple. There was a surveillance camera by the staircase which captured her arrival. The staircase was a one-way path up the hill, yet the camera did not record her descent. The entire round trip should not have taken more than 5 minutes. Even considering Miriam's unhurried pace and her likely desire to admire the view, she should have descended shortly after. While it was a beautiful temple, there was nothing else on the hill to linger for. Several hours passed and her moped remained parked at the foot of the hill, but she was nowhere to be found. Since Miriam was traveling alone, no immediate alarm was raised. Additionally, it wasn't unusual for her to not use social media for a few hours. However, as evening fell, her family back home began to question her whereabouts. Soon, the reason for her disappearance became known when a Thai tourist decided to take a stroll along the remote path leading to the temple. Halfway to the temple, he noticed something strange. The tourist didn't immediately realize that it was a lifeless body of a young woman. It was lying at the bottom of a shallow ditch, covered with leaves and debris. Horrified by what he saw, the tourist promptly informed the police. It didn't take the officers long to confirm that it was indeed Miriam. After examining the body, it became clear that this wasn't an accident. While her leg was indeed broken, she had died from multiple blows with a heavy object to her face and head. The absence of clothing and other signs indicated that she had been sexually assaulted. However, the identity of the perpetrator was still unknown. The police cordoned off the crime scene and began their investigation. So, to reach the temple on the hill, there was only one path: the staircase, with a surveillance camera positioned at its base. The same camera that had captured Miriam during the day. That very camera also recorded that after her, only one person had ascended. An unknown man had parked his moped, exchanged a few words with the flower vendor, and bought a small bouquet of marigolds. Then, without any haste, he started his way up. Very soon he descended again. The clothing of the man seemed damp and somewhat faded to the flower vendor who worked at the stall below, although he wasn't entirely sure due to the initial dark color of the man's clothing. Nonetheless, he asked if everything was all right, to which the man shrugged and said he had slipped. It seemed like an ordinary incident, but something didn't sit right with the flower vendor, so he stored in his memory the man's appearance and even remembered the moped's license plate number. When several hours later Miriam's body was discovered and the flower vendor's worst fears were confirmed, he immediately relayed all the information to the police. By running the moped's license plate number, the police identified the unknown man who followed Miriam to the temple as 24-year-old Ronicorn Romruin. He was a resident of the island and worked by collecting trash that washed up on the shore. He was described as a quiet guy who preferred working alone. Every morning he went out to the sea in his boat, and in the evenings he would return home, watch TV, and have a beer. Perhaps his life wasn't eventful, but Ronicorn had found a way to inject new sensations into it. The quiet guy harbored a dark secret. He had developed an addiction to illicit substances, had been using them for a long time, and rarely seemed to be fully himself. He was arrested the next day when he went out to sea on his boat. Given the evidence collected and the surveillance camera footage, he had little choice but to confess. The case was remarkably swiftly solved, and within 24 hours of the crime being committed, the details of the girl's death came to light. On that day, Ronicorn woke up early, started his day with beer and 2 shots of liquor. But that wasn't enough, and he wanted something more potent. After consuming illicit substances, he hopped onto his moped and began aimlessly driving around the island. It was a meaningless ride until he spotted an attractive lone girl. That girl happened to be Miriam Bilt. The man openly propositioned her for an intimate encounter. Naturally, this was not in her plans, and she continued exploring the sights, soon finding herself at the base of the stone palace, completely unaware that the persistent stranger hadn't given up on pursuing her. As Miriam ascended the stairs towards the temple, any other person would have gone about their business. However, not Ronicorn, especially given his state. Spotting a vendor stall, he bought flowers, assuming that his gesture would win her over. With the bouquet in hand, he followed Miriam. As soon as he managed to catch up with her, he attempted to give her the flowers and once again propositioned her. Needless to say, Miriam declined, feeling very frightened. Worse yet, she realized she was alone on top of a hill in a forest with a stranger who was asking extremely inappropriate questions. She tried to walk away, but the man followed her, thinking that she could quickly descend the stairs without knowing that he was waiting for the perfect moment. He ambushed her. Just a few moments later, he saw his chance. Ronicorn grabbed Miriam and dragged her into the woods. Naturally, she screamed, but there was no one nearby to help her. Ronicorn subjected the girl to a terrible ordeal, forcing her to comply with his disgusting desires. When he was done, the poor girl was naturally traumatized, but she mustered the strength to attempt to escape from her assailant. She leaped up and dashed down towards safety. However, despite Ronicorn's clouded mind, he knew he couldn't let her escape. She saw his face, and he was likely to be caught. He decided she needed to disappear. While she was still some distance away, he caught up to her. Possibly during this pursuit, Miriam had an unfortunate fall and broke her leg. In any case, Ronicorn caught up to her, grabbed a rock, and struck her multiple times in the head and face, leaving her defenseless. After committing the heinous act, Ronicorn returned home, where he tried to wash the blood from his clothes, then settled onto his couch, smoked cigarettes, and watched television. Luckily, it was his last day of freedom. The next day, as he didn't show up for work, he was arrested. The man confessed only a few hours after his arrest. Multiple pieces of evidence were found on Miriam's body, at the crime scene, and in Ronicorn's house. including the bloodied clothes of the man, leaving no doubt about his guilt. A reconstruction of the events of that day was conducted by the police. The Thai police have a tradition of conducting reconstructions of various crimes as part of their investigative procedure for over a century. Ranakorn showed the police 5 different locations connected to the crime, where he initially met Miriam on the street, where he parked his moped, attacked the victim near the temple on the hill, assaulted her, and left her body. The police shared a photograph in which the accused, whose head is hidden under a blue bag, is seen raising a stone over the defenseless actress lying on the ground. This image is impossible to view without emotions when understanding what Miriam must have experienced in her final moments. Thailand was in a hurry to close the case, and the trial took place only 3 months after the attack on the hill. Considering the surveillance camera footage, the confession, and other evidence, there was practically no doubt about Ranakorn Romruen's guilt. The man did not ask for forgiveness for killing Miriam, but his mother did it for him. She explained that her adult son lives separately, so she had no idea about his destructive tendencies. However, Ranakorn's actions shocked her so much that she demanded the most serious punishment for him. Essentially, she insisted on the death penalty or life imprisonment. Even his own mother had no doubt that if he were released, he would commit a crime again. The court considered the fact that the man confessed to everything, which was a mitigating factor in the charges of using prohibited substances, driving under the influence of alcohol, and even violence. However, the murder he committed was so horrifying that he was sentenced to the highest form of punishment. Currently, he is awaiting the execution of the verdict. Thailand as a whole is a very peaceful country, and when the local residents learned that one of their own had been so cruel to a tourist, they felt genuinely bewildered and disheartened. After the murder of Miriam Bilt, the inhabitants of Koh Sichang Island came together to offer their condolences for her loss. They brought flowers, prayed for her, her family, and for the hope that the girl's loved ones would soon find solace. Thailand depends on tourism, and they are concerned that the negative reputation will impact foreigners' desire to visit the island. But nothing can compare to the true victim of this crime, Miriam. Miriam was a young, adventurous, and ambitious girl who embraced life to the fullest. She was at the very beginning of a successful career, yet still found time for herself and to broaden her horizons. So much interesting lay ahead for her, but all of it was taken from her in such a selfish and heartless manner.